welcome to our study session on May 22nd. Appears we have, I don't know that we need a quorum, but it appears we have one, so I'll turn it over to staff.
Alright. Oh, there we go. Looks like we've got the tech running. Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you very much, for being here this evening. We're gonna go through, in this study session, the text amendments and zoning map changes that are proposed here in this 2023 update to the ULUC. Turn over to Zareen to talk a little bit about the zoning map updates first.
Sure. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We went live with our pending changes 3 weeks ago. And we have it open for about 2 more weeks. And if you remember last time, I kind of directed you guys to how to find this page and how to make comments. Great news, we made updates to the website where if you go to our website, there's a huge banner right on top that'll take you now directly to this page for the landing page that had the comments and stuff. So even easier to find it now. So I just want to give that update, and we've been putting it all on our social media and everything like that for outreach. So in terms of some zoning map amendments, we've noticed some just errors on the zoning map that staff is proposing changes to. For example, this property here on West Bowles Avenue, this whole property or this whole area is zoned open space because it's a park. Unfortunately, there is a private residential property that kind of got lumped in with that open space zoning that we are proposing to instead change to an acre residential zone district to match what's existing, and it's not a park. Next up, there is residential development here on the southwest corner of South Hill Street and West Ridge Road. There's multifamily and single family residential here. A bit of an error on this image. We're actually proposing zoning to medium lot residential / planned development overlay. There is a planned development that applies to this area, and based on those zoning documents, it allows for that single family. So instead of multifamily, it'll now be medium lot residential to match medium lot residential / PLO to match what's existing.
North south was the Windermere, or was it? It's a
Hill
Street.
Ridge
and
Hill Street.
Hill.
So we did have a question in regards to this that came up through comments, and I know it looks like there's nothing built in that image in my highlighted area, but there are actually single family homes in that location currently.
And then over here, we have the Aspen Grove development that you all heard the MDP for. So based on your approval of that MDP, we're proposing to lift that PLO designation and just be that underlining corridor mix CM zone district. And you'll notice that for several other changes further down this page. Next up, we have another bit of error here where this property that has a commercial development on it got lumped in with this open space zoning that is to the east of it. So and there is planned development that applies to this whole property. So we're just proposing to match what's there and align the zone district to be more business center planned overlay district or BC / PLO. Again, based on approval of an MDP, we're just lifting that PLO from this property over here and going to the underlining zoning of CM. This is the Evergreen property that you guys saw the MDP for. Another MDP case approval that resulted in removing the PLO designation. This would be the Powers Place MDP, so we're just going to that underlying zoning of CM as a result of that. So just kind of minor fixes and changes based on some MDP approvals, and that's all we're proposing in terms of zoning map amendments at this time.
Any questions in regards to zoning maps before we dive into code sections?
I just have one. If I'm John Q. Public and I pull this up and I compare it to a previous map, are you labeling out why the underlying, zoning was removed and now it's like, cause people may not know that they came before us, something got approved, stuff like that.
So, on the zoning map, we would basically just remove the small PLO designation.
Right.
We track that typically within ULUC when we do updates. It wouldn't necessarily be reflected directly on the map. Something
But
we can-
somewhere somebody would know if the PLO is gone,
Mhm.
they can go somewhere and see why that happened because something changed,
Yeah,
obviously, right? I
yeah,
know there's some hawks around that watch this, like a hawk.
yeah, I think, we will have the ordinance, any ordinance that would pass that would amend the code, amend the map, would then be referenced at the bottom of, Encode, into the future. We could talk about whether or not we want like a ordinance update reference on the bottom of the map itself. I know sometimes you see that when maps are amended, and we wouldn't have too awful many of those yet because the whole map was amended recently. So we could probably start to chart some of those as long as it doesn't, take up too awful much space on the map and affect the quality of that map. But we can look into that, sure.
Yeah, we would also need to figure out how to best show that to the public, just because our zoning map is a little dynamic and
Right.
Yeah, we do have
kind
a,
of display that.
we do have a static one that I think it would maybe be a little simpler on. The
Yeah.
dynamic one
Be hard to
maybe
just
be a little more.
zoom in crazy.
GIS has been working on updating our map portal though, and oftentimes when you click on parcel, there's a lot more data off to the left. We're still working on some of the bugs on that, but there might be opportunity to include some history on those things.
Yeah, I still get people running into me asking me Aspen Grove questions.
Okay.
And it's like, okay, go to the website.
Well, those questions might increase here lately because there was a neighborhood meeting about a potential, future project there. So you might see some more of those.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And hopefully, the packet included the information on the little description. At the end, we did have the zoning map amendments and description of the change, so it does say it was removed due to MDP approval and why else. So if you are getting questions like that, you can always refer to the packet material since it is public now.
I think you said, but this last one, I must have missed that MDP. Yeah, just because I wasn't on this board prior to this, but so an MDP has already been approved for that one, that's why the PLO is getting taken off, okay.
So it actually bridges the two parcels. It's got that parcel in the corner and the one in the next to it to the
Okay.
west. Yeah.
But only just this corner had the yellow.
So I have one other one that makes everyone's attention a while back. And the reason I asked Windermere and Hill Street, there's one at Windermere and Ridge Road that to me appears to be not consistent with the future land use map. And it's currently zoned MFR TRO.
Is that
It's all
Littleton
single family
Cemetery?
homes in there.
Is
So maybe that is the correct zoning, but it doesn't appear to be based on the current land use. So if that's one that you could look into, it's and the zoning map, it's just kind of different than everything else around it.
Okay, yeah, I apologize. You said Windermere and was it Ridge?
Windermere and Ridge Road,
Okay.
the southwest corner.
Perfect. That's what I was going to ask. Thank you. All right, we'll take a look at that. Thank you.
It's a fairly large area, it includes Prescott Street and
Okay. Any other questions or comments on map changes? All right, thank you very much. We'll dive in then to, if everyone has this document, we're going to kind of use this as our guide. So it does jump around just a touch, but mostly we're going to use this because it'll hit our 6 primary target areas first. And then you'll probably see us go back a little bit into the earlier sections when we get down to the bottom then as well. But the first item is adaptive reuse, and that is 10-1-3.3. So we're proposing to remove this section and replace basically the almost verbatim, there's a few changes to this section down at 10-9-5.8. So one of the main reasons for this is because instead of having this just as kind of an incentive program, we're looking to make it into a process. So we've also proposed amending the 10-9-3.9 table that is, which is our process table, to include an adaptive reuse process on that. We did have a number of comments and questions that came in regards to this change. And the first one we had, and I'll try to go through some of these, and if we want to get deeper into them, we can, otherwise I'll kind of let you know that we will be taking a closer look and we can reach out to individuals that made comments directly and have, the discussions with them and try to make sure that we understand and take all of those into account. But the first comment in relation to adaptive reuse was about F decision criteria and compatibility. The language in this section seems appropriate. The development needs to be compatible with surrounding context. This section, however, contradicts with C, reuse incentive above, i.e. B, additions and new buildings on the site may be completely exempt from general and zone-specific design standards. So in regards to this, just kind of quickly, we understand there is a section in the first part referenced that talks about how you don't necessarily need to comply with the compatibility if certain criteria are met. And so, it can conflict, but at the same time, there is a section where it does talk about allowing things to occur without compatibility if, for instance, it's not visible from a road or something like that. But that's something that we're happy to look into closer. I know pulling one tiny little section out is a bit challenging to discuss.
Sorry, I wrote that comment. It was like, whoa, there's something in here that says you can basically just ignore the underlying zone district for height and whatnot. That statement's in there, and then it does go back in and it says the director needs to look at the development to make sure that it is compatible. So it was like, it just was contradicting.
Well, we also, Zarina and I took a look at this, and even if there are some instances where it doesn't conflict, we do think that could be clearer. So we're happy to take a look at that further. So thank you. The next item is in regards to the applicability and dimensional standards for adaptive reuse. Alignment of additions with an existing building. An addition could expand horizontally from an existing building or vertically on top of the existing building. The idea of aligning an upper story addition to an existing building facade may not be desired, especially if the building is under landmark designation. The adaptive reuse would not necessarily allow us to preclude HPB review, etc. So once again, that's something that we can make clear if so desired. But that's definitely not the intent, is to have a historic structure have this provision just let you knock aside the historic provisions of the code.
I wrote that one too, so that, and it just was, there was a comment about legacy list or referring to a legacy list, so I guess that may be eventually made available. So is the legacy list always a landmark building or?
Not necessarily, but potentially historically significant, potentially eligible for land grouping.
So HPB still may trigger an HPB review.
Correct.
And Yep, I looked that up as well after I saw the comment, so understood that's something we can also take a look into, the legacy list. Let's see, the next one, provide a link to legacy list, that was it. So yep, we're happy to help clarify. And then I believe we had one other comment,
Dan, did that address your concerns?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, yeah, what is it, because the first part of the code says, hey, look at the legacy list, so it's like, all right, we can have the legacy list. And then if it is a historic building, great that it's gonna trigger HPV, which they will have all their sort of requirements, so it sounds like we're covered.
well, and
Well, we're
as
getting
mentioned, yeah, we can, there could be work to clarify.
This is a draft. This is
Yeah,
why we
yeah, yeah.
solicit your
Right.
comments.
No, yeah,
Yeah.
so no,
Yeah,
and
no, that's a
happy,
great comment.
yeah, absolutely, happy to take those in. We had another adaptive reuse comment a little lower on the page of comments that were handed out this evening on page 2. Not sure that I support removing this entirely. I think we probably answered that looks like it's all going away, but it's not, it's just being relocated, so. Okay, excellent. Any other thoughts or comments on adaptive reuse? I didn't get too deep into the weeds on the actual code, but as I mentioned, it's more of a relocation and a making of a new process.
I would say in the procedures, in number 2, it says that in the review and decision area, it says the adaptive reuse plan approval criteria is what they're using, but it's not called approval criteria here, it's called decision criteria. So I don't know if that's just something that needs to be academically cleaned up, because those could be 2 different things.
Okay.
So
Approval criteria to decision criteria.
and I actually liked the design thing that got added in, cause that, I think when it comes to like the historic part of it, is that they're trying to make the rest of the building look like the part you're trying to save to a certain degree, I think is what the intent was, so.
Excellent. Excellent. I think we'll head to cottage court communities. 10-4-2.2 and the NB, so neighborhood lot and building standards. So we did update some densities to the cottage court community. Staff did a fair amount of research on cottage courts, trying to see what other communities have done, trying to draw out a little bit more what the intent of a cottage court community is. So we've looked at that. We haven't updated a lot of the text in regards to intent, but we did want to touch up a couple of things. So the intent though of the community is that they are typically smaller homes with detached parking associated with it as a typical, with a kind of a larger so this drawing is pretty good, but it does show independent driveways, and a lot of other locations throughout the country, when they talk about cottage court, they don't have a driveway that leads straight to the house oftentimes. Sometimes they'll have, most of the time, they'll have a parking set aside as more of a shared area. So, but other than that, this drawing's pretty good, but you can see they're typically much smaller homes. So we have updated the density on that, and then we've also made a few other changes, adding a maximum square footage that's more in line. We feel that that's more in line with the intent of the cottage court, kind of smaller home setting. And then we've done that for not only single family, but duplexes and multiplexes. Could you keep going down, please? Parking, we have added some language in regards to parking, and then that is also reflected down in the parking standards as well. Intended to have shared on-site parking, whether enclosed or surface spaces. Right now, you're really only allowed 1 parking space per cottage court. We felt that was potentially too low, so right now we're proposing a minimum of 0.75 to a maximum of 1.5. So that is based off of some of the research that we've conducted. That number, we're open for feedback in regards to that, and parking space number. And then as I mentioned, minimum, maximum parking requirements are referenced in that, parking table as well.
There was a public comment to try and up it to 1 as well, I think. But
Yep, there was, thank you for agreeing that, yeah, they did not feel that 0.75 was indicative of the vehicles that would be parked.
So I did have a question about how you bump, what was the rationale for bumping up the density? It sounds like you done research on that.
We did, and a part of the rationale for bumping up the density was when we added in the smaller home size, the smaller maximum size of dwelling units. Then we felt that with that in place, we could bump the density up to kind of work in balance with those two. So therefore, you couldn't potentially come in and say, hey, I want to build, really large homes or something, and I expect a density of this. And so that's where we were kind of trying to find a happy medium on.
On that, the diagram that is actually in the zoning code, I think works out to be a 12 unit because I believe it's a 2-acre
I
site
think it's a 2 acre
and
site.
24 units. So that is showing a density of 12 units per acre.
Are you gonna be changing to that or I don't see it as 10 here.
We were not proposing to go all the way to 12, just based off of some other locations that we looked at. So we did think that by allowing additional parking it would be really tight to fit 12 individual homes on an acre lot.
The same with the unit sizes, that just research.
Yeah, we pulled a couple things, I can't recall exactly the locations, but several out of California that had worked on similar developments. There's one out of Oklahoma that was interesting and really nice stone architecture to it. But yeah, a number of different examples that we looked at.
is that where the square footage requirements come from as well? It's just based off of sort of what you're seeing as a trend or
Well, we actually have an application in right now that took the cottage court and put 5,000 square foot home and trying to utilize the cottage court.
This is one house. Yeah.
So.
So you felt like you needed some sort of definition on the square footage
Very big
to
cottage.
avoid situations
Very
like that?
Only
Alright.
one.
I mean, the idea is to put in more density, more places to live.
Yeah, I mean, if planning commission feels like that, increasing the density, that is something that we absolutely would consider and can look into.
Going back to Todd's comment about intent, the intention of this form is to allow for a lower price point, more accessible form of housing. They tend to be smaller, starter kind of buildings. That to me suggests that allowing smaller sizes is good, and more density or basically more units on less land makes the cost of the buildings less expensive for developers. So if we're talking about what the idea of intention is with this form, then I think the higher density is warranted. I would be fine with 12 or 2 acres, 24. I can imagine a lot of locations not even needing this much. You can imagine a cottage court for people who don't have a car, that if it's built near the transit stations, this is the kind of form, its intention is to allow that level of affordability. And that's, so people who don't have a lot of money for extra cars this might be a very useful way for them to get a little house as opposed to an apartment, sort of a housing option for them. So I think it makes sense with the intention of this form to allow lower parking requirements and more density. I don't think 10 units an acre. I've seen cottage courts where they're paired up, they're semi-detached sets on this, and you can do that. You could do triplexes, like townhomes basically. All of these things I think
just did that.
reach towards making a little place where there's a lot of different housing variety and affordable options. The bigger we make it. So I also wondered, in that vein, we allow the lot coverage of single-family homes to 0.60, which is 60% of the lot. Why not allow the same criteria for cottage courts? I can imagine one that doesn't have a lot of parking, has more buildings, less parking spaces. If we allow 60% of a lot to be a house, then 60% of a cottage court could be houses. It just seems fair. Why is it 0.45? It just seems like most of the lot is not homes. The intention is to create cheaper homes. So if you're asking the commission's, this commissioner says yes to density and following the intention of this form more.
Yeah, and maybe that's, maybe this coverage is something we take a look at because there's already a standard for common open space within, within the cottage court neighborhood, so maybe we can look at that a little
One of
bit
the things I think is
closer.
most powerful about cottage courts is that the lack of driveways, the idea of a shared, I often see just a small sort of walking path in U where the buildings all face it, and there's parking on the outside, there's one single driveway and a little bit of parking. Just getting rid of all that driveways, think of how much driveway space takes on any normal house. So here we're saying the lot coverage has to be smaller for cottage courts, more space, even though the form could be actually in reverse, where you need less driveway and more building space, so I would say.
So I heard a couple of folks asking for, look at slightly higher density for cottage courts. I've counted to 2, can we count to 4? I'll say yes, please, if you would. Take a look at, some options. I guess with the caveat that, one thing when we were designing the ULUC was, can we make sure that the numbers in these charts can transfer to a plan view that could actually function?
So I think we heard the number 12
Yeah,
dwelling units per acre. Now, would we wanna put that in both the MLR and SLR zone districts? Right now, we're just proposing 8
It was
for
just
MLR and then 10 in SLR, so. Just wondering planning commission's feedback on that, would you prefer to see 12 under both of those?
So just ask for clarification. You mentioned sort of duplex cottage court. I guess I envision cottage court as being single units detached. So there is a carrying capacity within an acre, even discounting parking requirements. For the 1,000-foot minimum dwelling size, I think, which is in there. So just kind of doing the math in my head, I could see why maybe you came to the conclusion that going above 10 might add too much density. I'm in favor of whatever the maximum density is and trying to match what we're trying to do with duplexes and townhomes and that, and up to 0.6, coverage. So I would support that, but I guess I still don't completely understand the intent of a cottage court. Could it be triplexes and duplexes that are arranged through there? Is it gonna be tiny homes that are smaller than 1,000 square feet? So
Just to the square footage to lot size sort of ratio, I suppose. Is there any way to create some sort of sliding scale for that? Like if you shrink the size of your units, you can put more of them, or something to that effect. So since you're trying to crunch numbers, is there any way that we can get some sort of ratio possibly in that effect in order to that way they can kind of create it, and not to go over a certain maximum, of course, you're gonna have to put some sort of maximum, possibly even a minimum on that in order to get sort of a sliding scale of, if you make your units this many square feet, this is how much density you're gonna get out of it. And it's gonna probably depend on what your lot size coverage is, going back to Patrick's point as well. So, I don't know if there's a way to do that, that's probably, you're starting to get into calculus at some point, but
First grade, I forgot.
the other thing I found odd in this is that none of the garage doors can face a certain direction. I didn't understand the intent of that whatsoever, to be honest. If there are garages here. And I know that wasn't an update, but it was just one of those, like, why is this in here?
Prohibited from
Yeah,
facing
garage.
public streets
Yeah.
right of ways unless screened by a type B buffer. Yeah,
Oh, so they're allowed if they're screened. Even
Which-
if my garage door is not screened. I'm in a single family home. I mean, what's the difference? I don't know.
I think the intent, and I'm not defending it, but I think what the intent probably was, is that if you had a bank of garages, that it might look a little less inviting to a, yeah.
Rather than a bunch of carports though, I mean, it's,
Yeah.
you know. Anyway, that's my thoughts on it, I guess.
I think it might be also the idea of a court. That you want a court-like structure in the home. It's open to all the driveways hitting the public street, because then you're just putting basically single-family home kind of structures along the street instead of creating that inner courtyardy kind of enclosure. That's just a guess. I have no idea. I'm in favor of less specificity about. I generally be like, yeah, we let anybody put a garage facing whatever on a normal house, so why saddle cottage court communities with some other design criteria? But I think in this case, it was meant so that it could be courtyard like courty, and not street
Yeah.
connected.
And it's probably because the thought is that you're gonna have the street that runs through it, kind of like that design. So,
An interior road.
mhm.
The other, it's not exactly the same topic, but kind of on 6B parking in garages. There is, no, not that one. C, 4-car bays. That seems, the garage would be larger than the home, almost. That seems excessive.
Well, and you would they would be shared though, so you would have, say, like a bank of 4 parking spaces in one garage, and then a space probably in another bank, and all of those would service the the whole community rather than be associated with one home.
Should that say that then?
We could
Garage
probably
shall not
look into
exceed
making that
4-car
clear.
bays. Shared.
Common garage or
A
something. It's-
common
yeah.
garage or
I
shared
mean, it's like, yeah,
garage.
let's build this humongous garage at our little bitty cottage court.
But I think that scale seems appropriate, that you would only have little buildings that, it's a 4-car garage, it's 12 by 20. It's a smaller scale rather than, we've done them where they're like 8 long, right? So 4 is nice.
Yeah, for like
Scale.
typical multifamily
Yeah.
development with those garages, yeah.
Going back to your query about whether we want to match the densities for MLR and SLRs for cottage court. I'm looking at the zoning map, and one of the things I've always felt challenged by is that our map is, I don't know if you want to bring this up or not, but on screen, but MLR and SLRs are kind of unevenly defined in the map. There are MLR lots that are small, and there are some SLR parcels that are quite large. It becomes something of an arbitrary. It can be there's parts of the map that don't even make sense. I mean, you look at Peak View and Valley View. The houses are very, very close together on it's an MLR zone. Where you go over to Spotswood and Old Littleton, and you have lots that are bigger. There's not a huge, to me, there's not a huge difference in a lot of cases. I think in terms of the way a lot of our MLR is structured, if you go up there and zoom in on some of those MLR neighborhoods, you'll see the houses are very close together. And I don't think a cottage court adjacent to these would be disruptive to that. So I think that the bright yellow is SLR. Is that how that's what?
That's correct.
So zoom out a little bit. So in the lower right-hand corner, just above the word city code, those are MLR, but look at the spacing on the houses there. very,
Sorry, bear with me, there's things loading.
it's very dense, those
Give us
lots are
footprints.
marginally larger than the SLRs. Ones on the left are smaller than some of them, my parcel's bigger than a number of these houses, yet this is MLR. And in Old Littleton, you have the brighter yellow LR, single lot, I just have never really felt that. My druthers would be for the city just to have a residential lot, two categories, you know, the large lots, acreage, and large lot, and MLR, SLRs would be combined. So in my thinking about the way our map is sort of arbitrarily creating these two district designations, you literally can walk downhill and not know when you walk between the LLR and the MLR. You'll shift between as you go down Hill Street. There's Shepherd. You know, it's just
Bless you.
so. That's just my view is that we should have a cottage court density. The simpler it is, the better if you want to get these things built. And the medium lot areas have larger lots, so the potential of redevelopment of any of these lots into a cottage court maybe has even more chance to happen. But that was just my sense that there isn't a significant change between these two in the map structure. It's hard to even sense as you walk around the community what the difference is in some places. So, okay, my person, one good cottage court density for LLR, or MLR and SLR.
For it to be the same.
For it to be the same, whatever it is. But we have a cottage court form and people can build to it if they have the room for it.
Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess that said, there is a continuum, right? I mean, so the SLR and the MLR can be very close. But the intent was from the future land use, from the vision, was to, draw a line at some point. So, and that line does reflect some changes in density. If you look at the overall density of MLR versus SLR average, there's a clear distinction there. So, I guess I would be in favor if we're gonna, say the SLR density from 10 to 12, perhaps we go from 8 to 10 on the MLR, just to keep that sort of consistent. But that's, that's a big if.
And provided that your analysis shows it could actually work.
Right, just to,
Yeah.
I guess that's my question, what is actually workable and doable? Planners.
Yeah, we,
Community development team over there.
Yeah, and I think our ask would, if we decide to ask it, would be, could staff, do the technical analysis on that to make a recommended change.
we can do some additional research, bring back some examples, and, based off of that, it would be an interesting means of trying to, it's always a little challenging to try to game out exactly what could be done on a parcel.
Right.
Because there are so many variables, but we do a little more digging into that, sure.
Patrick, you were saying that the maximum building coverage, you want it to be the same as well, correct?
I was thinking that we should have a building coverage ratio similar to single family duplex, triplex allowances.
In both.
In cottage courts, we can match that. It's 0.45 in there, that's that, wonder where that ratio came from, since we allow people to build over a large section of their lot for the house. Why can't we allow people to build cottage courts over a similar, but their home part,
Makes
the home
sense.
says the same ratio over the land. A developer, people building these things are gonna wanna maximize it, so when we have a constraint like, you can't cover more than 0.45 of a lot, it constrains what can be feasible, what can work, and also how much housing gets built on these kinds. And the intent of the cottage court as a form is to produce more housing in a denser form at a lower price point. And so it just seems like we could further that intention by increasing that lot coverage ratio.
I agree. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, it seems the reverse of what
should
it should be to accomplish affordable and or
Higher than a house.
the ability to build a smaller home.
And that's probably at the expense of the open space and the parking, that's where they've gotta take it from, so.
I think with a lot of this will be contingent on what you find out about how much an acre or two could. I mean, a very expensive, form of cottage court could have the parking all be underground, lot coverage is, like, if you have enough money, you can really do an incredible thing. But, we're gonna assume surface parking for this, right?
A 4-car garage though. It
Four bay.
cannot exceed that.
You get multiple, you get
Yes.
multiple buildings before
Yeah.
these.
Right.
I do think that can be something that we look at in conjunction with the density as a whole.
Yeah.
So yeah, happy to look into that.
Thank you.
Any other cottage court items?
Is there one of these that I could go look at in Littleton?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Yeah, what about the city?
How about,
Metro
how about
area.
Yeah, I know,
in the Denver metro area?
anywhere, yeah, it just seems to be a rarity.
California, you said California.
Yeah, we have examples out of state that I'm happy to share.
Field
In-
trip.
Yeah, precisely. In state, we'll have to do a little more digging and see if we can get you a good in-state.
Boulder.
Yeah.
Stapleton, Reed Valley, Calthorpe was really big on those, so I think you might have included some at Central Park.
I was thinking that as well, but I think like they have these like private courtyards and they have the homes around it in Stapleton and with the garages facing out into the private alleys, attached garages mostly. But I'm not sure if like the building sizes, they might be a little greater, they might be more of like 2,000 square feet, a little greater, but like the intent that it has that like private green in between for some of them, but yeah, I think so.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of that approaches this would be that Peakview Circle over there, over by Peakview and Cayley, where they've got all those, they seem a little bit closer together, but they've all got their own driveways. They're all single family homes, but they tend to be smaller than what's around them. That's the only thing that I can come up with that would come close, but.
Yeah, and there may be old examples from the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s in Denver,
That's right.
in Denver proper. Most of what I recall seeing driving around are duplexes mixed in with single family homes in Denver, but there may be examples. I know of one in Omaha, I'll be there next week.
Go take pictures, Jason. There's the one in Oklahoma, I could look at that one. Hey,
Yeah, we're a little
Hey, they
surprised
use
to find one
rocks,
in
okay.
Oklahoma.
Hey, we're
Lots of
getting
rock.
quick trips from Oklahoma, right?
Okay. Well, I think we got a lot of great feedback on that, a lot of things to mull over in our next round of, or next draft, I should say.
We're gonna try our best to do some drawings for you all.
Yeah, we'll see. It'll be, I don't know, those projects are always fun.
They seem to be closer together and smaller.
Excellent. So the next item, or the next large topic area would be accessory dwelling units. So we are proposing to make a few changes to accessory dwelling units. I know that this has been a good sized topic of conversation just regionally, statewide even. Right now, staff at this point in time had not really contemplated diving into a lot of the fine detail. More of what we are proposing in this update, and one of the reasons why we're having such a great conversation tonight is to acquire feedback too. But most of what we're proposing are trying to eliminate some of the potential impediments or things that would drag out the process a little more for people who are interested in ADUs. So for instance, there's a component in the ADU chapter that talks about conditional uses, talks about how you would have to go through a process. So staff is proposing eliminating the conditional use portion. So either is allowed by right with condition, or with standards, try not to confuse with using conditions the same, or prohibited in that area. So that's more of what we're proposing in this update. As I mentioned though, happy to take comments, etc. For instance, it's really tough to see, but that detached ADU, there was a little 4 next to it. We're proposing to cross that 4 out. Thank you, Zuri. And the 4 was the portion that says could require approval by a conditional use permit. And then if we go to the ADU section outside the land use table, the 10.1.1.7. So this first section here that talks about, that we're proposing to scratch is just a redundant section. It's nice at one point, but at the same time, it is just reflecting what's in that land use matrix up on 10.1.1.3. The next one is that conditional use standard. Keep going down if you would, please.
This is the strikeout.
Yep, that strikeout was in regards to the conditional use standard. So let's see, 2 stories permitted. So we're trying to also allow in this section, those 2-story ADUs if the principal structure is a height of 2 stories or more. Architectural standards, we're proposing the removal of this item. Any garage door shall be removed from an accessory garage space that is converted to an ADU, and the opening shall be treated and finished to match principal dwelling. In our opinion on this, it's,
Why is that?
yeah, why are we proposing eliminating it?
I mean,
Or-
it's just gonna, I'm sorry, maybe
No,
mean architect, but it's just gonna look like a converted garage. It's like it doesn't have a home character to it.
and, we're happy to discuss, we just know that some locations now have done a lot of fun things with like garage.
Nano doors that.
Yeah, that do fun things. But regardless, if you are converting something from an ADU, it would still have to meet, or to an ADU, it would still have to meet building code. And a standard garage door, probably is not gonna meet, your,
Oh, energy.
energy, things of that nature. So that's why we were kinda like, you could open up to a fun outdoor space if it met building code. Definitely something that we can chat about, so.
In defense of the garage doors, I mean, there's another section, 5A, that says the principal dwelling unit shall not be altered. These are for putting an ADU in an attached or contained. We're talking about that because there'd be an existing garage and we're putting an ADU in there. It says the principal dwelling unit shall not be altered in any way so as to appear from a public or private street to be multifamily housing. See, if they leave the garage in, you're not supposed to appear in any way like, this is a garage, it's not another home.
It's not uncommon to have garage, changes and still keep it single family, but I understand the point.
This prescription is about not altered in any way to appear as a multifamily. Like, don't even let that second doorway be visible.
We also wanna make sure that parking code requirements are being met in terms of if you're removing garage doors, you're removing parking spaces. And sometimes, a lot might not have space to build another garage, or you wanna add, or enough spaces on the driveway to have spaces. Because you're gonna have to meet parking code now for the principal dwelling and also for the ADU.
And the other reason this is brought up is we actually, if you read it in a certain way, we had an ADU that was an existing garage, and it was just the top floor that was being converted to the ADU. So they didn't want to remove,
The garage
The
door,
garage
it's
door.
still in use. Got it.
so they could still use it, but when you look at this, you just converted part of the garage into an ADU, and therefore you could read this to be, you gotta remove the garage door.
I guess with this struck, you could replace it with a very high-end garage door that meets our values for residential space. It's that indoor outdoor living. When I saw that struck, I immediately thought of some of the commercial applications on Main Street where they have the garage doors for outdoor, connecting to the outdoor seating areas.
I'm just gonna throw this out here, but I haven't written this into my comments, but we currently limit well, first of all, there's a comment here I wanna call attention to, number 3166. One of the last hyphens in this comment was, the gross floor area increases are a good improvement in many other communities. It's great that the allowable sizes could be larger for the attached units, as most people want to convert a basement, and that would likely be more like 700 to 800 square feet. Imagine you have a 1,200 square foot house, which is a small home in Old Littleton, and you're putting an ADU in the basement, contained. 700 square feet of it, that would be the maximum you could do. It seems to me that for contained and attached, it should be bigger than 700 square feet. We might want to just say the same square footage as the existing unit.
Or not greater than the
Not
existing.
greater than the existing unit. Pulling back on this question to the larger question of intent for ADUs. We have a lot of very small homes in Littleton. Some of them built in the first half of the century, on fairly large lots. There's a lot of room for additional housing. The intent of ADUs is to increase the amount of homes without changing the neighborhood that much. My view is we should allow the ADUs, I'm just putting this out there for future conversations because I know we're not here yet, but ADUs should allow a new house of whatever size that is allowed for single family houses as a detached ADU. In other words, you're living in a small 1,200 square foot house on a 9,000 square foot lot. Kind of like what I have. And my footprint's 1,207 square feet. It's a big lot. I could build another house and move into that, and the ADU would be the original house. Like really the excess of the cottage, the grandma cottage would be the old house that was on the lot. I mean, to the neighborhood and to what we're doing here, it doesn't matter that the new building is a full-size house and that the old building, the 1952 cottage, is the 900 square foot or 1,200 square foot little building. So the idea of the ADU is just you're getting two on a lot that has room for these two if you can fit it. So if you really want to energize the creation of ADUs, you really take off these little as somebody who's thought about building an ADU, a 700 square foot apartment, you're building all the construction, the foundation work, all this money to build a 700 square foot thing. I mean, it's not going to rent for very much. It's a small building for a modern person. We don't think, almost no one buys a home under 900 square feet today. So like you're building this other house, but for whom? College student? You know, like even 800 square feet is smaller than any of us live in. So what kind of ADUs, who's building these ADUs and why aren't we seeing, Inglewood's had almost none. They've had ADUs for 3 years in Inglewood. They have criteria like ours and it's restrictive and no one's building them. And this, my larger conversation for us to think about is if we want ADUs, we want homes. And we want homes that fit in the neighborhood. And if we're allowing a new home to go in, allow a new home to go in. And if the old house is a little shack, that's really what the ADU would be today. We would never build a 900 square foot thing today. That's the grandma cottage. So.
And just a point of clarification on this as well. So the 700 and 800, that is referencing an increase in the square footage we made to the table specifically for standards for detached ADUs. The contained and attached, they just, for gross floor area, they can go up to the maximum building coverage of the zone district it's located in. So just wanted to make that clarification.
So
And then
we're
back to.
the full basement.
So if it was
So
a
it could be the
basement,
whole
then you're good.
Yeah. But if you're doing a detached ADU, then it does come into that restriction of 800 or 700 square foot, depending on the zone district. So kind of just wanted to point out those differences and what their this comment is a little misleading in terms of what it's referring to. But to Commissioner Santana's point, should we increase that square footage even more to something else in the MLR and SLR zone district? Any other kind of comments on that from other members?
Usually building in
I personally like having a cap on them, it keeps them accessory to the primary structure, it's right there in the name. Now, there are definitely situations where what you talked about could work fine, I mean, if, you're looking at a really large lot, actually dealing with this in the rural areas of Arapahoe County where the old ranch was built in 1920, 1930, and it's like this really small two-story building maybe and just doesn't have a lot of room, and someone's looking to, have a place to age in place on their, 30-acre property. Totally fine if you build a bigger house than the really tiny ranch house that was there a century ago, in that context, but now maybe it could be a little bigger than 800 square feet, but I rely on kind of staff for a technical analysis on what's that look like in terms of massing in neighborhoods.
How about a percentage of the existing
Lot area.
lot area
It's like lot
or
coverage.
the percentage of the existing building as opposed to a fixed square footage?
Yeah, I think that's probably the route to go.
Could have a bigger
Yeah,
secondary house.
Arapahoe County has a maximum accessory building size except in rural areas of 1,000 square feet, and then there's a complex formula in the draft ADU code that could allow you to go to 1,000 square feet if the house and the primary structure and the lot are of a sufficient size.
So it's like lot coverage.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's a formula based on the size of the lot and also the size of the main building. So I guess if you wanted a bigger ADU, you could build an addition to your primary structure and then qualify for a few extra square feet.
On your ADU.
Yeah.
How much does it cost to build an ADU?
Absurdly
half million bucks or
absurdly
so?
high.
Yeah, I know it's high.
Well, we have a few examples.
Good you asked. So we have some
A
examples.
few examples, so
Yeah.
we did receive a question earlier today in regards to kind of the history of what we've seen here in Littleton. And
From a planning commissioner.
yes, so we did pull some records and we are working we have a CO on one, so one has been accomplished. We have one that the permit was issued, and that was approximately $280,000. The first one, I think we have,
And that was an 800 or 600 square foot, sorry.
these are attached.
Oh, okay.
So,
Attached, oh, okay.
yeah, new accessory dwelling unit of approximately 13, so that must have been a basement. 1,388 square feet, probably a basement.
Just a clarification on it, if that was an attached, like a basement remodel, are the, per building codes, is it required to be a separate conditioned space, separate HVAC system, 1 hour fire separation, like, is that what's kind of driving the costs on that, or?
That would be my guess, I'm not 100% on the building code items,
Yeah, I'm not
but-
100% on the building code either. But you can get clarification on that.
And that was how much? To what?
280,000. We have one on hold right now, I'm not sure what and another one under review that are closer to 150,000 units, so. So yeah, we have a couple anyway that are working their way through. We also have 4 that are either expired, withdrawn, or voided. So we do have there's also kind of an inquiry out there about how much interest there is, and I have a few phone records, but I don't think they're truly indicative of what we've heard. We have heard a number of inquiries throughout all the planners over the past few years, at least since I've been here. I've taken 3 or 4 phone calls about ADUs.
And I think just anecdotally, most of them will be inquiries related to wanting to do a detached ADU. However, we do have certain standards that preclude them from moving forward. For example, we only permit detached ADUs if you have direct access to an alley. So that's knocking out a lot of properties within the city of Littleton. And that's a standard.
Are we not changing that in this update?
Yep, that's getting straight.
Proposed to. Staff are only proposing minor edits in terms of getting rid of the conditional use permit, that's imperatives in terms of public hearing, but if you would like to, suggest getting rid of more standards, but that's your prerogative, but anecdotally, that's one of the definitely, don't have alley access, you can't do a detached ADU.
That eliminates most of the city, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah. And then also, detached ADU has height limits in terms of if you did wanna build a detached ADU on top of a garage, but your primary structure is only 1 story tall, you can't do that. You are only permitted to do a 2-story ADU if your primary structure is also 2-story. Other imperatives are, a detached ADU can only be located in the rear yard. So just pointing out some standards within our code that might be prohibiting ADUs. I know there's certain perception that making some changes to the code I think got some comments of let's prohibit it everywhere or open it up everywhere, but there are certain standards that make that a little hard or are kind of prohibiting people from doing that. So just wanted to bring that to all of your attention.
It seems when we were looking at a lot of these, when we were developing the code, that we did talk about a lot of these things, and it seemed like we were getting pushback on that was a topic in specifically, and I don't know where that was coming from, because we talked about, well, why do we have to restrict it to an alley? Because it does eliminate most of the properties here. And so I think that goes back to kind of the last meeting we had here where I said, are we putting the, editing ahead of, or the code changes ahead of policy discussion? Because I'm thinking that was a policy discussion that happened at a different level, that then we were kind of pushing on it, but it didn't happen. So, in the same with cottage courts, we've really not had robust policy discussions around some of these topics. And so now, though, through this process, hesitant to say, but we're kind of making those changes. I mean, we are making them, or we have the opportunity to make them. So I don't know. I mean, that's why I brought this up the last time when we talked about code changes. Because to me, a lot of these things are policy decisions. And our job, I think, is policy support or decision making.
Or advisory to the council, right? So we can suggest it, but they can.
We can do one, yes, we can.
And
So, I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there.
And if I remember correctly, when we did last year's code changes, that we really focused on just cleanups. And yes, this year we are definitely starting to dip our toe into more policy issues. The issue with ADU, if I remember it correctly, it was planning commission that was very much for let's not have the restrictions. And then when we had that conversation with council, they were in a different place at that time. And that's how we landed on just the alleys, and they wanted it, they took more of a, okay, let's see what happens if we go this far. So, completely up to you if you wanna rip the Band-Aid out. I caution you that it is a more robust conversation about ADUs that I really think we probably need to have a broader community conversation.
That's what
about
I'm
it.
saying, basically, that we're right now going through code changes that I remember some of these being, there were policy issues at the council level. And I'm just making comment, not one way or the other.
Yeah.
well, and I certainly appreciate the clarification of the earlier comment. I get where you're coming from, and I've just been hearing a little bit of kind of the history behind things, et cetera, and that was one of the reasons why we didn't, at this point in time anyway, propose doing a lot of substantive changes to location, et cetera. We are trying to allow people an easier process that are eligible currently, because we did know as staff that there were concerns about or there had been robust conversation about exactly where these should be allowed, et cetera, in the city. And so that was one of the reasons why we were trying to still make some improvements, but yet not necessarily dive into that larger discussion. But we're happy to take comments and notes, et cetera.
We are getting into policy discussions with this round of code amendments, so this is definitely the venue to have those conversations.
Well, you had mentioned I think last time the council's goals, and I don't have them written down here,
Right.
but I can't remember if housing was one of their goals.
Number one is housing.
So we could take an aggressive approach to be like, here we go, right?
Yeah, we're starting on it. Well, and then we have that list of things that were more in-depth discussions, cottage courts being one of
Cottage
those.
courts and ADUs.
So it seems like the format that we're using now, we're going through, edits, and yet it seems like we should identify or go to that list that says ADUs, community cottages, and we talk about those. Because some of these things became more filled in the code later, and we really didn't talk a lot about them. We put them in the parking lot. And this is one of them, and so is community. Correct. Cottage communities.
Well, they're in the forefront now, so definitely.
Okay, it's just a process that we're going through right now is more of an editing. I know we're having discussion, but it's like, are we doing both of these things? Are we doing policy decision, sport discussion, or are we just gonna do edits? Are we doing both?
Ease of process is not what's stopping ADUs. It's
having to
no
put them
place
on
to do it.
Practicality.
That's to
Put them on alleys.
right, yeah, exactly, I mean, so laudable that you're looking at that. In this particular spot, it's probably not gonna make any difference, would be my guess, I mean, maybe, but there's probably work in doing them, right? I mean,
Understood.
yeah, I mean, just
So then do we go ahead and just make those comments and make edits and make recommendations on the editing and send it back? That's what we're doing now.
That's all
Well,
we're
I
being
mean,
asked to do,
having the
right?
conversation now, if we get planning commission direction of, hey, we'd like to go a little bit further, we certainly can look into that. The way our code is written right now, without some more in-depth work on our part, which happy to do, we probably should go over the timeline. That the inadvertent consequences that we're seeing, when we change one thing, it has this unintended consequence later on, and so
Dominoes.
like Zareen said, we have a lot of standards, design standards associated with that. So is it, and this is where, I would look to planning commission to help us weigh on as well, is there one aspect that we could change that would not have that domino effect? And if we look at location, like if we remove the alley restriction,
Can I offer a framework that might be
okay,
able to address how to approach this? Basically, we allow single-family homes to be fairly large and fairly tall, with fairly substantial structure. This is 1658 Maplewood, right off of Windermere Maplewood. This is a fairly newish building, probably 5 to 10 years old, built before we had ADUs. There is a very large 2.5-story garage, a 3-story, 30-foot high building, and an accessory unit on, it's probably like a carriage house, but it looks like it might be an Airbnb. I don't know if any of you have seen this house, but we allow fairly large single-family homes with 2-story full-size garages with peak roofs. The idea of the ADU, its intent is to allow homes to be added to lots that don't disturb what neighborhoods look like. Now, this is a fairly large building. We allow an envelope of this size. If you were a single-family home builder, you can build 6,000 square feet with a side building and a 2.5-story garage. As long as ADUs conform, now our ADU rules right now are super restrictive. We could get a 7, maybe 800 square foot little detached building added. You could never, this is allowed, this does not disturb the neighborhood, this huge building with an outbuilding and a full-size garage. It's not just wrecking the neighborhood, it's conforming to conforming to its surroundings. So ADUs that fit the single family homes overall restrictions would do the same thing. So as a framework, a lot of this is sort of, to me, unnecessary. We basically should allow the ADU to have the same structural requirements as the home. And if there's a second home on the lot, but they don't have to be, as long as the look is basically within the envelope and the height. In other words, this garage is big. Like if you were doing ADU above a garage, why isn't it allowed to be as big as this guy's garage, right? Right now, you wanna put an ADU over a garage, it has to be 50% of the floor area of the existing garage, and you can't go with a peaked roof over it. We had a whole conversation about this, like, we allow this kind of garage building for a single family home, but we wouldn't allow it if this was just a flat one-story garage being converted into this as an ADU. So it just seems like a lot of simplification could be done just by aligning. In other words, if you allow a single family home to cover 0.6% of the lot, so you have a 10,000 square foot lot, you could build a 6,000 square foot coverage home. So the ADU rules would just be like, okay, you can cover 6,000, this lot would be normally 0.60 coverage. As long as your coverage stays the same, what do we care whether there's 2 units or 1 huge house? The same, so you could build 2 3,000 square foot homes. One would be an ADU and one would be the existing 3,000 square foot home. Like, that would be legal, more or less. You could cover, a single family home could be 6,000 square feet on that lot. So what does it matter in terms of the conformity to the neighborhood? And that's what the goal of the ADU is to allow another home without challenging and hurting the look and feel of the neighborhood. So that's a framework you could use.
So I just have a suggestion. Before we put staff through a bunch of hoops, I guess my question would be, current council has made it clear to Jason, that housing is very high up, but obviously a couple of years ago, somebody did not want ADUs. They wanted it to appear as though we were trying to add housing. Does our current council think differently, or are you gonna work up a bunch of, I really like your framework, but to rethink a bunch of this, we give you this recommendation only to have council slap it down because they still really don't want ADUs, I guess, is all I'm asking. I mean, I don't know what they think, and I don't know that it's ever been brought up to the current council, probably not, right? Not until after it gets looked at by us. But anyway, I mean, I think, like you're saying, there's a ton of dominoes that fall, and I'm all for achieving what I think ADUs are supposed to achieve, but not if there's this roadblock that.
The makeup of council has changed.
Yes, it has, right? Yeah.
So I think it could potentially be a different outcome. And we're actually, tomorrow night, there is an item on the council study session of, we actually put together a comparison of some of the items that were recommended in Senate Bill 213 that was not successful compared to our current ULUC and what that permits. And the topic of ADUs has come up, as well as cottage courts and density.
So we might get a little bit of feedback from staff after that meeting?
100%, and we
Okay. So then.
and your next study session, even probably prior to that study session, we can share that matrix with you as well.
So if ADUs are only restricted to homes that have alleys, is that right?
Detached.
Detached.
So you
I
can
know
do.
have you counted how many, so like, do we know that, 50 in the city.
So, or, you know, it's like,
Somebody probably.
I could do that analysis, we did do that, if I remember correctly, we did a very, like a pack a napkin rough estimate. I mean, it's less than 100.
It was one of the reasons that I asked you to do the workup of how often, how many have we done since the code update, how many have been denied, how many do you, and I know tracking the phone calls was gonna be almost an impossible ask.
That one was gonna be a little
We
rough.
pulled 5,
Yeah.
we had record of 5.
So I just wanted to know what those numbers were and what we're looking at here, because the alley restriction is, it's a killer. It's not going to, you're just not going to do it.
You're gonna
So-
get less than 100 with the current
And
code,
they had-
or if you lift it, it could blossom to.
Right.
Yeah.
X.
And you had more withdrawn or expired than actually got followed through on, if I remember the
We have-
numbers you threw at us,
We
right?
have 4 that are withdrawn, expired, et
And
cetera.
2 that,
Well, we have 5 that are either approved or in the process.
oh, okay.
So,
it's a little
so
bit more
we're,
than- got it.
you're really close.
Yeah.
I just didn't cover the rest of
We just
them.
have
That- they-
one that's
those are-
CO'd and one that's issued.
Got it.
Yeah, and then there's a
Yeah.
couple
2
under
basically that have really
review.
moved forward.
Yeah.
Gotcha,
And then I
gotcha,
forget
okay,
what
so
the
sorry, it's not quite
Those are
upside
almost
down.
all the contained ones though, right?
The point is well taken.
It's
So
a-
yeah,
It's a little maybe unclear based on the description.
right, there's a new ADU, that's the $280,000 one, and then there's another one of 470 square foot ADU. Yeah, all of these, we have one on hold that's detached, the other 4 are attached or contained,
That's what I would expect. I mean, I would expect most of them to be the attached time because that's
right?
basically what we allow everywhere. So,
I can also say, living in the neighborhood that has alleys, being able to actually construct an alley-loaded ADU is very difficult. You can't do it over the garage because almost all of the structures in the
Single-
neighborhood are single story.
Well, yep.
So my ADU would cost well over 500,000 because I'd have to pop the top on my house and then, you know.
but your home value would skyrocket.
Oh, right, yeah. And I think absolutely the alley loaded was a very limited, let's dip our toe into the water because, you know, back at the time, I think some of the discussions were this is really the only way to get ADUs into the code was to, you know, have some limitations on the geographic area that could be affected.
Parking was another concern that was expressed by both boards, you know, if you don't have it on alley, would they start parking on the street? If you don't have a driveway,
That's a good point.
And then there's, you know, some who believe our streets are woefully underutilized. We should all park.
It's a good point, but at the same point, you know, if you live across the street from somebody who has three teenagers that all have a car,
Oh, yeah.
it becomes sort of the same.
I would want that.
It becomes sort of the same situation. I mean,
Again,
and that's
it's
Come to my
like, if you
cul-de-sac.
allow it, it's-
so it's sort of the same.
So
but-
what is your direction?
Yeah, so I guess, I think let's get back to Commissioner Santana's discussion on, you know, should there be a size limit? And I guess one potential another way to phrase that, well, or to maybe water it down a little is, should we treat ADUs the way we treat any other accessory structure? Like, how does the code treat an accessory garage? I mean, if I wanna build a 4-car garage that's 10,000 square feet, can I do that today?
Depends on your lot coverage.
Yeah.
goes back to luck.
A lot of it has to do with the ratio of
Mhm.
construction on the space available.
Correct, and I mean,
Rather than some
you
fixed
still have to
number,
meet
like-
setbacks and.
I will say that I do think that even when we take the alley restrictions off, we still are not gonna see a lot of these constructed because 700, 800 square feet, it's a lot of money to put in a very small building. None of, I just noticed there's a great history document about Littleton, 1947, 1967. In the post-war era, the typical house size was 929. That was the average median single family, 929 square feet. 1950 to 60, it was families, GI Act families built, people lived in small houses. Today, the average person has 900 square feet. So 3 people will typically want 2,700 square feet. We're talking about a building structure, an ADU, detached ADU, that is smaller than a 1950s family would have lived in. And I don't think modern people are very interested in that size. It's almost a tiny home. I mean, honestly. And we're not gonna see a lot of them built, alleys or not, just because it's a very small building and it's granny flats. You'll get people who might build it for their relatives and in-laws, but it's just, California has had this legalized for a long time and for 4 or 5 years has had statewide ADU allowances, and they haven't seen significant amounts of housing production in ADUs. What they're doing now is there's 2 new bills to open it up further. You'll be able to split all lots. Washington State has this. You can divide your lot and sell them independently so that you can draw a lot line down the middle of the lot in 1 of 2 directions. Being able to split the lots off and sell it is a major way to like incentivize and make it possible financially. And that wasn't in the original ADU laws in California. And the other thing they're doing is everybody can split it and everybody can sell it. And the other thing is that basically it can't have any more permitting hassles than single family houses. The process, there isn't a separate process really for it. It's just streamlining the process. The standards applied to ADUs cannot be any different than the standards applied to single family homes. So garage doors allowed, trim requirements. Like they can't put, they were making people go to discretionary hearings, neighborhood reviews for just ADUs. They didn't require for single family homes. Municipalities had all these ways of like getting in the way, and they're making it the same. They can't have different. They were making ADUs required LEED certification. If you want to, it has to be new, it has to be quality. That ended up being a way of block communities who use. It has to be ADUs had to be LEED certified. California's saying no, you have to use the same set of standards. Single family homes, ADUs, they're basically the same thing. So we're not there yet. I don't think we're not ready to. Inglewood, for instance, requires you to rent it. You cannot sell it. Because we can't divide lots.
We have
We have deed restrictions.
deed restriction on it.
So
Yeah, and that was a comment that came up as well. So I know I haven't touched on all the ADU comments, but there were a number and a number of quite well thought out comments, and then also a comment that Zareen referenced earlier about prohibition as well. So we had kind of both ends of the spectrum.
This is why we look to you guys for
So-
direction.
So I guess the
Which way do
question
you
is,
wanna move?
And the
size
conversation.
ADUs or no?
well, we can feel out. I mean, the idea of allowing ADUs to be up to the amount of space a single family home could have. In other words, like I said, if you could build 6,000 square feet home, you can have 6,000 square feet of buildings, whether they're ADUs or a single home, or ADU and a contained, etc. If council members are not cool with that, I think we should at least consider as a backup plan to suggest that we raise our size square footage to like 1,200 square feet. Something to a modern small home.
It seems like if we went or things went that way with the first suggestion around, percentage of building space built, and you could build 2 homes the same size, 3,000 feet or whatever,
3,000.
then it seems like you're moving then into a possible subdivision of the lot situation at some point. And to me, that would have a huge impact on the existing neighborhood and its character. I mean, that's when you start getting into, some really troublesome things, I think. It's just like subdividing a lot almost. Even though you're saying that they have to be deed restricted and they need to be rented or whatever, that seems problematic. I mean, I like your idea. I don't know, it seems.
I think the
really,
question,
really-
I mean, so there's a couple different levers we can pull, right? So what's the, if the council goal is increase the number of housing, what lever would make that happen?
And affordability is also a component of that. It's not just housing generally.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, I mean, it was withdrawn, but there was an ADU addition above an existing 3-car garage that had valuation of $300,000.
So detached is not most likely may not hit the affordability number we're looking at. I mean, so can you pull a lever that is incentivizing contained or versus detached? I don't know.
So contained and detached are allowed in any zone district.
Well, contained and attached are very minimal, like, it's administrative, you can pull a building permit, you know, it doesn't have as much regulations as a detached ADU.
Right.
Most of our standards are related to detached ADU, and most of the calls related to ADUs we get are related to detached ADUs, as opposed to contained and attached, so.
So the demand is in detached is what you're thinking?
Yes. We're not getting like 100 calls a week, but when we are getting calls related to ADUs, it's related to detached. And oftentimes, it might be, you know, oftentimes MLR district, zone district, and the first thing we look up, it's like, oh, you don't have an alley. And then it'll be like, well, what if I create an alley? And I'm like, well, how are you gonna create an alley? You know, it starts getting to little semantics with people of like, how do I get around
So
that?
what if we make a recommendation tonight to remove the alley?
That's,
For sure.
yes.
I think
It's
that's
definitely a first step.
staff to go that way, and we maybe temporarily avoid the square footage questions and things like that, although I happen to agree with you, as opposed to throwing too much at.
Well, my proposal with the framework idea is that again, same thing with building envelope. We have a lot of ADU, detached ADUs have a lot of these structures, that building envelope discussion should be no different than the single family homes. In other words, if we allow someone to build this kind of home that you can see from the street, what do we or the neighbors care the ownership structure behind that? Like, oh, that's actually owned by somebody else, or if that's grandma living there, like, if it conforms to what the neighborhood's home structures, and that's, again, it's like, whether it's in front or behind it, I've seen houses on Bemis Street that are these little shacks that 70 feet back from the property line, they were put in the 20s or something. The ADU that really needs to be built there is a new modern house in the front of that lot. And that couldn't be legal according to what we have now. ADUs have to be in the rear yard. If it could be a house built legally, it could be a house built legally. If we allow 4,000 square feet on this lot, what does the neighborhood care, whether it's this way or that way, or, you know, whether there's two owners or one, or it's grandma and a renter, like, these are invisible to us. And so the framework I think it should be fairly simple. We shouldn't care where these two buildings sit relationship to each other, because like this guy built a big front garage on his thing, on this thing I showed, you know, we allow that in a single family house. We get out of the way for a wealthy single family homeowner. They can build all kinds of different things, but why are we in the way for ADUs? So again, the whole section of the code about building envelope and the way that whole conversation we had about the 1.5 stepping, I was like, well, what could you do if you wanted to build it? This guy, he built a big garage, 2 stories high. There could have been a unit above that for all we know. So if you can do that now.
Yeah, I guess I'm hearing a lot of support for loosening the restrictions that we have right now. And the idea of removing the alley requirement, I think, is one step, but, you know, I'd go further to suggest that all residential districts allow it. You know, in fact, I think the LLRs are probably best suited to accommodate.
Some of them have been, as well, we talked about this, legal or not,
Yeah.
they're there.
Guest house. Right, exactly.
See lots of them.
And then, but, you know, I would kind of push back on the idea that, you know, 2 equivalent structures, one an ADU and one main unit. The traditional definition of an accessory building to me is subsidiary to the main building, but I think it's semantics at that point. Like, say you wanted to do something like Commissioner Santana was suggesting, you want to build a new ADU that's the new one, and the older unit becomes subsidiary, and then you just approach it that way. You say, okay, well, I'm building a new primary structure and the old one becomes a ADU, so
I
it's
don't
just
see
a
why you
matter of
couldn't do that.
semantics. So-
But,
And I don't know if we get all of that, but I think we can pass a recommendation along to council to loosen the restrictions in all residential.
And I think that's in the red lines, that it struck the alley requirement.
Which one though, cause it's still, I see
I thought it was still there.
it's still struck.
Yeah.
I didn't see that, where's that at?
It's detached
The
ADU.
domino.
Oh, sorry, it's in the
Um,
matrix table actually, which is where I was
The rear,
before.
if you're looking at the 10-1-171, the rear lot requirement
So
is
under
directly
the
related to.
land use matrix table, subnote 1 states detached accessory dwelling units is permitted with alley access only.
Oh,
If we
Yeah.
look at,
Yeah, we can strike that if everyone.
wait, okay, which line is it, cause there's another,
So we need
would
to
you
strike
say,
that,
sorry,
right?
Yeah.
Oh, it's in
the
the land use
matrix
table.
okay. Cause there's language in 10-1-1-1, whatever, 7, under detached ADUs, be detached. And I'm reading it thinking, does that even make sense? It's 3A. Shall not serve
It's a- I'm
ADU
sorry, what?
separate from that service, oh, unless it
Sorry,
is a alley. Well, anyway, I think that 3A needs,
Where-
B3A needs some consideration for a change as well.
purpose?
That one,
Of that.
or is there a different 3A?
It's under, it's, you know, it's under, what, I have to go way back.
What's the capital
See the
letter?
map that says 10-1-1-7, I mean the diagram.
The figure, it's further down in the.
Yeah,
ADU
it's
section.
it's underneath figure 10-1-1-7.
Oh, here's the smaller B.
Go under B detached ADUs, number 3.
Separate. Okay, for the alley and principal dwellings.
No, it's just, I think that's stating that you can't have a separate access point for it unless the accessory
So,
dwelling
yeah,
unit has
two-
access to an alley.
Yeah, 2 driveways type of a deal.
You can't build a second driveway to it, is that what it's saying basically?
Unless
It's
there's,
just an alley.
Unless it's an alley,
Yeah.
yeah.
But it sounds like there's consensus amongst you all to remove that alley standard from the land use matrix table.
Yes.
One of the standing points, and maybe
Should we vote?
But
Yes.
associated to that though, I mean, to go back to the sort of domino discussion, it's like that the diagram that we just scrolled past is saying that the detached has to be in the rear lot.
Right.
And that seems to be directly related to this alley requirement. There's a lot of lots that, I mean, this diagram makes it look like every condition, could only make sense in the rear, but there's a lot of lots that have huge side yards
Yeah,
and not backyards.
my address is actually 7,000 South Gallup, but it faces Meadowbrook. Gallup doesn't even touch my house, so technically the back of my house is the side of my house, technically, if you really wanna get technical about it. There's just weird lot things that happen, particularly in the 60s.
Like this, that says detached dwelling.
Actually, that's.
So what does everybody think about that, where it doesn't, removing that it has to be
In the rear.
in the rear? I'm just throwing it out there.
yeah, so the detached is the only one standard that stays
Right.
located in your yard.
I've seen codes where it's to make sure it's, accessory and kind of subordinate to the main structure, it must be behind the main building line, so like in a corner lot condition, you can't stick it out in front of the house, even though it's technically your side yard, it would have to still be behind the main structure.
It's similar to a good code that addresses garages, 'cause
Yeah,
the
accessory
garages
building.
tuck back.
Yeah.
Accessory building.
And I thought we were talking about just the driveway itself or getting into the accessory dwelling unit, not the actual structure
Yeah,
being in a
that's-
side yard.
Yeah, I mean, if you put in the side yard, it would still have to utilize this same driveway,
Right,
the way,
Yeah, and is that
one
what
section that
three-
you're writing?
B3 needs?
Yeah.
Vehicular
It can share the same driveway or it has to have an alleyway.
Yeah, it's trying to get away from having two access points on the same street, yeah.
Well, any thoughts on whether having it in the rear yard is too restrictive?
I guess it depends on the reason that, you know, I mean, I would defer to you guys are actual architects and planners. I mean, if you, I don't know who would, well, I mean, here's the house you're pointing out, in theory, he could have put it in front of his house with, instead of a garage, right? I mean,
But I think that would be more of a situation where you're building a new primary residence and calling the next, the existing
True.
structure, the ADU, and that's something, I think those are probably an exception. They're, just because there are some of
Weird
them,
exceptions here.
Yeah.
Not gonna lie.
Yeah.
so.
It makes me wonder why we don't, if you can just add a new home to any lot, do we even need
Right.
ADU rules? Like.
And in
how
most
come
of the
people
zone
aren't doing
districts,
that?
you can't have two separate structures.
Okay.
Density speed, I mean, the way it's written right now. And we even have on the
So
main
we're-
land use matrix, and you'll probably remember this, and the conversation about duplexes and twin homes. So basically, south of Kaylee, you can't do that, but north of Kaylee, you can.
so those of you who have experience with requests for ADUs or anything like that, is it really high up on the priority list that there is a separate driveway / thing, or does it, I mean, cause if it's not, then, I mean, I, you know, I don't think it's a, maybe we don't have to say that it has to be in the backyard, you know? I mean, why can't you just share a driveway, right? But I'm just asking if it's not gonna help, because they're just gonna go, yeah, thanks, but we only wanna do it.
Are these regulations similar to accessory structures? Cause I don't believe accessory structures are permitted anywhere
Accessory,
except
yeah,
the.
accessory structures can't be located in front of the front building or facade.
So if we treat these the same as a normal accessory structure, then as long as they're behind the front building line.
So you would be able to do the side, in theory, if you have enough over there. Well, that's better than nothing, right? I mean,
A little more flexibility.
It could get complicated with a driveway.
driveway,
Yeah,
driveway needs to
I
be-
mean, then it would go to something like Dan's house that has this corner lot already and could potentially get another street cut.
I can't build anything in the backyard, cause it's all flood zone, so it doesn't matter.
Maybe that's for the best.
Which we just
I make a
proved last
motion, we
time.
change the floodplain rules. and no.
That's way, that's like better.
No.
One thing I did wanna point out is rear yard is very, in our code definitions, it's very specific to like behind,
The entire building.
yeah, like
Front
behind
facing.
the building.
Right.
So I think we made actually a change last year to the code to make the accessory structure, or like accessory buildings like garages, being able to build in side yards behind the front facade, cause they were also stated as being in the rear yard. And based on code definitions, it became like, oh, actually rear yard is behind the rear building facade,
So why couldn't an ADU do the same thing, right?
they could, but we
Except
would need to change
you'd need
this
to
code
change it.
language on this table from rear yard
Right.
to locate it
Front facade.
behind front
Behind
facade.
front.
So just wanted to point that out.
Would there be anything wrong with it being located no further forward than the front facade? So you build it like on a wide lot like Dan's or Tim's, you could build a second ADU up. It would look like another little house in the neighborhood. It could end up looking like another.
Yeah, that's
You
about,
just use the front, it shall not be in front of the front. Unlike garages where you do want the deprecation, the setback, garage, you don't, we do want to move those back. But I actually think it would look better in many cases for a second home, especially one that's newer and nicer looking than the old one, to be in the line with the houses that are in, not forcibly back another 5 feet or whatever arbitrary number. It's like the 700, 800 square foot. That just came out of outer space. Why was that limit put on? Why are we talking about, if we allow if we allow homes to be at this line on a street, then ADUs just have to follow the same rules as the other homes on the street. Eventually, to correct the question about this, accessory dwelling units being subsidiary buildings, I think in 50 or 100 years, somebody might not know which of them was the original. You know, you would soon lose track of which, oh, this was built actually later as an ADU. Oh, well, that looks like the main house. You can see how this becomes sort of a moot issue over time. Like our concern that these have to look like they were the lesser building added. I mean, the goal of an ADU is to increase fairly big lots to make use of all this extra space we have without disturbing the quality and character of a neighborhood. And I think it's maybe not necessarily bad for the homes to be all at the same. We can use the front line plane as the limit, just the same as any house.
Just throwing a little bit of language editing on the fly here. If we change this to instead of located in rear yard, instead to located in line with or behind front facade, how do people sound?
Behind the facade of the primary structure for the corner lot example, that way you're not on the side.
Or are we saying the front setback? I mean, what if the original is set further back than it needs to be?
Oh, yeah, that's true.
I mean, if every other house on the street is set to that front setback, but then
It should be just
your
the
house
setback
is set
between
10
the
feet
wall.
behind that, you can still build your ADU to the character of the neighborhood in front of that front plane.
That's a good point.
I'm looking at
So I
my
think that should
architect
be-
over here.
He's the architect.
I know, and
I mean,
I'm
it's a
like,
context sensitive setback or, so,
But it's the front
You're-
setback.
yeah, but if it's already back, if you have a home that's already
primary
back,
structure.
then your ADU should go back as well, or you're saying ADU should be able
My
to.
He
neighbor,
says it should be
if
able
my,
to move
if my
up.
house is back here, my neighbor's yard is up here, why shouldn't the ADU be allowed to align with
The context.
the adjacent context is my neighbor who's already way up front?
We do have some context sensitive setbacks in setback requirements in other sections of the code.
For new single-family residential.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like,
I
So the
mean,
framework
so there is something similar for, that exists that we could potentially utilize if so directed. Sure.
I think
It gets a little complicated because I think we require surveys as part of that requirement. I think we're requiring.
But I do think also that we're spending a fair amount of time on, the location of an ADU on a lot. But as of right now, they're largely allowed on smaller lots. And so to have it in a line, the likelihood is you're probably not gonna have a lot of that side yard there. So, but yeah, just.
I've got two examples in a room of,
But you guys live on Emmett Lawn.
We have a few, that is true, that's,
We allow that.
I'm not saying that it precludes all, but yeah.
Well, then that actually makes it easier to swallow if you're somebody who wasn't for it, because the chances of it showing up like that all over the place is remote. But at least you're not restricting it in a spot where it could work, I guess, right? Does that make sense?
Okay, so far we're hearing remove alley access and then
I think we're trying to encourage more ADUs, so,
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
That's what we're.
so yeah, go back to Patrick's point about framework, I don't know, I mean, I don't think like wholesale, everybody's like max lot coverage, minus setbacks, I don't think maybe we're there, but that's like the framework rather than this sort of, progressive toe dipping. We sort of start with council is like the framework is start with that and then review each of the sort of restricted pieces and which we would want to keep in light of that. Does that make sense?
So start with that being.
Start with the most progressive and then, but nobody's, but I think there are concerns moving that full direction that does in fact change the character of the neighborhood.
Well, if you go possibly if you go too far in your initial recommendation, you get the whole thing shot down, maybe. As
I guess
opposed
there's that
to,
too.
as opposed to,
Incremental.
yeah, well, dipping your toe, I hear you, I'm not a big on, I don't know, I don't know
I mean, we've
council.
dipped our toe,
Yeah, right, I
we've
mean,
gotten
Dip the toe.
5,
Couple.
I
yes,
mean, in 2
This rate
years.
we'll have 40 of them, maybe.
yeah, I know, right, so, yeah,
Well, I guess also, it's like I've been here not even 2 years and it's like we're already sort of folding in changes. I mean, what's the opportunity to keep dipping toes and seeing consequences?
Yeah, I
don't
mean,
know.
our code is set up that we will come to you every year with a slate of
Different tools.
recommended changes. Some of them will be on the policy level. Some of them are, we received an application and
this came up.
this came up.
I'm not saying that there won't be more cleanup items that we'll find along the way also.
And we might be seeing ADU discussion again, just based on the Senate bill that didn't make it through this round, but
Yeah.
we anticipate coming up again next year, so we might be revisiting this again based on whatever recommendation moves forward with that act.
You said you're having a discussion with council tomorrow.
Correct.
So do you say that planning commission is
Tossing this stuff around.
interested in
I
releasing some of these and they,
absolutely will
and if
convey
they're
that.
like, yeah.
We'd love to hear that feedback.
Then we can go further, it's
Yeah, well, it's
Tim's,
like then,
idea, well, right, it's true.
I think we're gonna solve it tonight.
Yeah, and one thing too, I mean, the cost we've talked about a lot is an impediment. And the way some communities have gotten around that, I think Denver's started to work with some of their neighborhood organizations to create basically like ADU in a box. Here's, 3 versions of a pre-approved architectural design for an ADU. You take this to the building division, you get an over-the-counter permit. Those are the types of things communities can do, because Denver, in the first 10 years of their ADU, only 0.7 to 2%, I've seen 2 numbers, of eligible lots actually did an ADU, so.
But they're also approaching it neighborhood by neighborhood through an area planning process, and they're getting pushback in some of the
Some of them,
neighborhoods.
yep.
Do they have a target number, Jason, do you know, of what they're trying to get people, as opposed to
Yeah.
0.02?
Yeah, other than more, I haven't seen one.
Just curious, yeah.
And I did see there was a comment on, the owner occupancy restriction, someone was concerned about that. I, just had to do some research on Portland's experience, and they've done it since about 2000, and in 2013, the state did a study and found that about 60 to 65% of ADUs ended up being owner occupied, even though they had no owner occupied restrictions. So, yeah,
Owner occupied meaning.
You mean like
The-
a
the
rel-
lot.
familial?
the lot
The lot,
itself
okay.
had the owner living on it, so
Okay.
I'm living on it and renting it to her,
Right.
the
Got it.
ADU.
Yeah.
Or my mom's living there, but yeah. And that tracks roughly, I think, with owner occupancy rates, in the US of, around 60-some%. And now individual neighborhoods may have much higher rates.
Well, I mean, another statistic to bring up, in our pipeline right now that has either, gone through a site plan process or has received a permit, we have 2,300 plus units that will be coming online. So we are definitely moving the housing needle, with the code as adopted. Changing ADUs or cottage courts is not gonna have that big of a moving of the needle, but it could move the needle.
Just the question would be, what percentage of the 20-some hundred are affordable housing? Right, that, if that's the goal of an ADU or a cottage court, right? But yeah, I hear you. It won't move the needle that much.
I almost think with that question, it's almost more, how many of them are affordable even? Cause we're getting to the point where it's like, how many of these are just, we're throwing up a bunch of apartment buildings as opposed to trying to get people into an affordable home-like structure so that they can start building the equity to get what they want.
Homeownership, yeah.
Cause I mean, when I moved out of my parents' house, I went to college at home, went to Metro, got my degree, stayed at home the whole time, saved some money, and I bought a place for like $140,000. that's unimaginable now.
You can't even get a condo for that
No,
at this
you
point.
can't. And, you know, that's where you start building to, okay, yeah, you build a little bit of equity into that, then you get into something that you want to, bigger if you want to. That's just kind of how I think most of us have done things. And that's nearly impossible, I think, right now with the cost of homes.
Does anybody know if that's what council meant by housing is ownership? Or do they mean affordable housing? And that includes, well, Ray, you can get into all this multifamily and it's affordable. I don't know the answer there. I mean, as an individual, I love your idea, but I'm just,
And I think that was one of the comments coming out of the Senate bill too, like,
Right, we're
is
trying
the
to
goal
foster-
affordability, or is it increasing zoning, is it?
Yeah, throw a bunch of rentals out there to drop the price of rent. Is it to try and get more people to own things so that they have equity and money? It's.
Right.
Yeah, it's a.
Well, the American dream zoning in your house, right?
And does anyone
Need all of
know,
them,
is,
apartments and condos.
is Denver Water, cause I heard Denver Water with it detached was requiring a separate tap.
I think so.
I mean, which is another, and I think tap fees right now are 25 or 30,000.
So, ADUs, does staff feel like they have some recommendations they can work with?
We'll go pull some levers and see what happens, how about that?
Yeah, and we'll have, I know we're gonna talk a little bit about timeline, but we will have, the opportunity to bring this to the public for some comment and then have a secondary comment period with some changes, or well, draft changes. So, you know, we'll talk, we will feel out, council, see how they respond tomorrow night. And then that'll maybe allow us to feel kind of where that pendulum is in regards to what we can propose on the next round.
Yeah, my interpretation was, the consensus was more permissive. We definitely got into a lot of the fine grained details on it. I don't think we came to a clear recommendation on every single one of the details, but generally allowing them in more places with more flexibility.
Can I start there?
Yes.
Okay.
Alright, next item is temporary signs. Serene, that one's at 10-. Yeah, we're on number 4.
We won't be getting through this,
Just saying that.
The next ones go quick.
Yeah,
I love sign code, you bet.
yeah, right, yeah, 5 and 6 would go pretty quick. But 4 on the other hand. Alright, so, sorry, my computer died.
Yes.
We'll bring it up. Next one down there. So first of all, signs allowed without permit, you know, we're doing a couple changes up top, so, but I think the other ones are down here. So, we are proposing, this is a little bit outside of, the temporary signs, but I'll touch it on now since we're here. Face changes, we do get a lot of requests for just a face change to an existing sign. And so we are proposing, you know, if there are no changes to the sign cabinet, et cetera, to being able to allow those face changes to occur.
Size doesn't matter, it's just content.
Yeah, because a lot of them are, not, you know, existing non-conforming signs, you know, you get the pole sign that has been there for a while and just allowing that face change, but if they wanna do any structural, any electrical, et cetera, then they'd have to comply with the non-conforming standard. Small temporary signs, so adding this as a section in general, post and stake signs allowed, per table, yeah, yada, yada, yada. And then if we go to the table. I keep going, I think it's all the way at the bottom, there we go, thank you. Number allowed, so looking at change, a few things there, and this is in, This is still in 10-1, so this is in regards to the citywide. So, you know, allowing 3 as the number of stake signs there, and then moving down, maximum sign area for temporary signs. So, changing the sign area, but then at the very bottom with a subscript, posts and stake signs that do not exceed a maximum area of 6 square feet and maximum height of 4 feet are allowed for up to 90 days without a permit. So this would be, you know, kind of your real estate signs, your, you know, and some of those don't need a permit in general, but,
Just
Yeah.
clarifying that they don't need a permit
for those
for
temporary
smaller
signs that, you know, we're not able to address content, so we're still trying to allow for a means of doing things such as political signs.
I didn't look up the definition. Could you describe the difference between post and stake?
I think the stake are the ones that are smaller that you like, that have the 2 that you kind of push in
Okay.
versus a post, which is often a little sturdier,
Okay.
that would be more of the real estate sign.
Okay.
I can
Are those
double check that
defined?
definition, but that's what my gut said.
Makes sense.
Sorry.
Alright.
Hamstring.
We have that in our document.
Any temporary sign questions or comments? I'll have one. I guess we allow up to 3 stake signs, but the max area is 4 square feet and the max square footage is 20 square feet. Or does that include the post sign? So it's both post and stake combined? Okay.
I see what
I
you're
think I've
saying.
answered
So-
my question. I see the yellow highlight in between that area of the table.
Okay.
So,
Yeah,
that first column, that
Yeah,
title
so,
doesn't
Yeah,
make sense,
sorry, we-
one number allowed.
yeah, so I just did the math again. So 310.
number allowed doesn't make sense on the
Yeah,
square
3 times 6
footage,
would be
I understand.
18, right?
Yeah.
Okay, no, we do need to make a tweak to that. Okay.
Just wanted to.
And then do we define, did you have a definition of stake and post?
Yeah, I was looking at that before.
Okay. I think they're all under
Sign.
signs,
They're all under
yeah.
So there is a post,
This is a post sign.
so that's a little bit more the real estate
Yep.
configuration.
I don't think we have stake. So we need
Okay,
All types of signs.
okay, we can add a stake sign,
Alright.
signed it.
sign, comma, stake.
Yeah.
Medium rare, please. No.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Any others quick before I? Alright, we'll go to major and minor plan amendments. So we've taken a look at the process and the qualifications, et cetera, for major and minor plan amendments. First of all, there's a section very early in the code that's planned overlay districts. We're proposing to, the planned overlay district, it's really how you amend it is what we're referencing in this. So how you amend it currently is you're able to do so through the minor plan amendment or the administrative adjustment. In staff's opinion, the administrative adjustment isn't really the format that we want to go for these PLOs, because we see administrative adjustments more like
They're
like a
minor
staff
variant.
variance, yeah, like a minor variance process. So we're really trying to push the planned overlay district changes into the minor plan amendment field rather than the administrative adjustment. So that being said, we reference that in 10-1, yep, okay, depending on the scope of proposed changes, 10-1, 1-2A, and then once we get down to the bottom, there's the major plan amendments, and so alterations proposed to better clarify. So we made a number of changes here, some are to the applicability because largely what we're trying to get to is that things should fall under either major plan amendments. If they don't fall under major plan amendments, then they're minor. Yep, so we're trying to make that a little easier, and so when we go, precisely, streamlining that. And making it easier on staff to decide which one it is, because sometimes they're both kind of covered, and so this will be a little clearer in the code. So this is why we've got a lot of those determining eligibility is crossed out in this section. Is there any questions regarding major and minor plan amendments and that process change? I think, now I'm trying to remember if there was a comment.
I don't think we have comments.
Okay.
So far.
So to remove a planned overlay, you would approach it by doing a minor plan.
It wouldn't be to remove it, it would be if you wanted to amend it. And we don't want there to be a lot of planned overlay district amendments, only certain things would kind of qualify. And so that's what we're striving, the things that did qualify, we feel that the minor plan amendment would be the process to go through.
How did you come up with the percentages? I saw, it was 10%, now it's 25%.
Yeah, that was probably the biggest change, I thought.
Yeah, we did feel that that the smaller things would be under the minor plan amendment, so we thought that in order to kind of shift things a little bit more towards minor, that we should give it a little bit more space to operate with it.
But it basically, I think the statement I had before says you still have to comply with the zone district's minimum or maximum standards. So it's not like you're getting a break. I mean, you have to do what it says you have to do.
Yep, correct, yeah, and the same is true of the PLO. If the PLO was more restrictive, we're not just throwing the code out, you would still have to comply with the base zone district on an amendment.
I suppose the hypothetical with this would be if we as a body approve an MDP and they come in and lower the parking by 23%, lower the open space by 23%, just to make sure they're under the 25. And I know this is like playing nefarious person or whatever, but is that an okay thing? And I don't know if if that would be because there's a catch-all phrase in here for material versus non-material, whatever. And I would assume staff would be like, this is a material problem. We need to probably address this with someone with an advisory body. That's the only concern I would have with this, I think.
I
No,
think
that's
there's like
fine.
other, requirements that would still need to be met, even if you are lowering it by a certain percent, are the minimum requirements still being met?
Of the underlying zoning.
Yes,
Yeah.
so if it's not
Yeah.
being met with that lowering, then you're going into that, bumping into that.
Yeah.
You need to get a variance type of category and go through a public hearing, so it's, even with these percentages, we're still checking for, is the underlying zoning requirement still being met?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if they overpark the parking lot and wanna reconfigure, maybe reduce it up to 25% and still meet the underlying.
And it still meets the underlying
Yeah.
zoning.
And, happy to take comment later as to opinions on 25% as well. Sure. Master development plan, there's, were some updates to the decision criteria, on the master development plan being proposed. So to the layout, what was removed there, the development is laid out in an efficient manner relative, so we kind of restated it a little clearer, we felt, up above. And also, there's some redundancy in some of these decision criterias that we were trying to remove also. So like if you had, a circulation or something, we're going to try to keep that in one spot instead of two or three. one of the things that we had run into in a number of, not just in this one, but in a number of sections.
It does say MDP, not MDF, right?
Should be P.
Yeah, it's just, I can't, yeah, I thought it was getting cut off, but.
I think that's due to the hyperlink that's
Okay.
on it, because you should be able to hover over MDP and it'll take you
And it'll
somewhere.
take you to it, okay,
Yeah.
alright.
Yeah, but yeah, both of those look like MDF, yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
There's some
Reads as
weird
P on the
formatting.
iPad.
Oh, it's cause I'm not working with the Apple, it's cause I was working with the.
I have a question on this one, on, do we define what the intent of zone districts are? Is there somewhere that's expressly stated? Purpose?
Gosh, we went back and forth on that when we originally adopted that, if we put in intent, and I believe where we landed is that it didn't belong in a zoning code and it's more in the comp plan, but
It is in chapter 1.
But either short
of purpose.
purpose.
yes, it's just
statements.
that,
Yeah.
and then we,
So maybe purpose.
In terms of like
But not
future
really.
land use designation, and then kind of, relating that back to the zone districts. But it is, in chapter 1.
so we captured it all there, but yes, at one point, there was a version of the land use code that had a purpose or intent in
But
every
we're gonna
section.
use this
And then we,
for evaluating in the future.
Yep.
Maybe just mention that table there. I wouldn't have known where to find the zone district purpose off the top of my head.
Okay.
I didn't know we had purposes
Yeah.
defined.
Maybe parent and reference the table, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Because I-
so you're talking
Is it
about
also-
C1,
Achieve the, yeah,
C1.
C1, decision
Okay.
criteria C1.
that's a great
I would take
suggestion.
the word intent out, if we don't define intent.
Yeah, I mean, arguably it could be the link to the comp plan, but if you cite the table, it already has the comp plan section listed in
It
the
does.
table.
Yeah.
So,
So
since we
what
don't use
wording would
intent,
you propose there? Is designed to achieve,
the purpose, parent,
Just
that table.
purpose. The purpose, table 110.
Removing.
111 of the underlying zone district.
to achieve the purpose of the underlying zone district as outlined or as defined
That-
in
that
the
sounds-
table,
yeah.
blah, blah, blah.
Wordsmithing.
That links back to the comp plan as well.
Did that make sense? Okay. Great suggestion.
A lot less writing than adding a whole new intent definition in section.
The definition section that we ended up with was about half of what was originally proposed, so.
I like the changes to decision criteria. I think we talked about this at a previous study session. I think you guys listened. I think it helped, it's very helpful to have an additional one. It's kind of focused on the actual site context, the landscape topography, views. Also, I just wonder, I keep thinking of, we have, whenever we have an MDP, we have an applicant, we have staff report, we have the code that we're interpreting, and we have public input. And how do we weigh that as a criteria, or do we not?
We don't.
I mean, I guess we can't.
I would like the attorney to answer that one.
Weren't you paying attention 2 hours ago? What criteria list is what you have to make.
Otherwise,
Yeah, you're correct, if it's not listed in the code, I mean, we're supposed to take that criteria.
Which
I think in general, people don't understand that.
yeah,
They definitely don't understand that.
now you will see Pam come up and correlate things to that. She's the only one that will probably do that because she's been to a million meetings. And she knows what we're judging things by and makes arguments based on what we're judging things by, which is what people should do. If you're out there listening, that's what you should do if you're trying to make an argument for or against something. That's what you should do,
Use the criteria.
is use the criteria.
No, and Craig's right, though. What do you think, 90% of the people that are off topic when they are making they're off criteria when they're making their comment, and you feel
Oftentimes,
helpless.
they're really talking about a site plan.
Right, exactly.
The way our code is now currently written, that is an administrative thing, and, you know, you have the public has their chance to weigh in at a neighborhood meeting.
So the purpose of the public hearing is just so we can get beat up and take it.
Yes.
Accused of not doing our job, accused of.
Very important part of the
Oh, come on, Craig, you're a public servant too. That's not just limited to.
Comes with the
Correct?
territory.
So then I guess let me ask a procedural question. We're getting close to 9 o'clock. I have about 3 pages of minor chapter 1 amendments. Most of them are not exceedingly flashy. I'm happy to go over them if so desired. I'm also happy to relate to the ones that had comments, etc. Is there a preference for moving forward with this evening's meeting before I dive right in?
Or do any of you have specific ones that you would?
I think that's a good question.
Yeah, so just looking through, maybe we should look through real quick, see if anybody has specific.
I cheated and looked at the test next to me, and it looks like there are some comments on that one. I see some
And
check
we
marks.
received some comments too.
Some of them were to look things up in other spots, so.
Yes, now you have seen the intricacies of the code, and most things have a domino effect.
And a few things are referenced in 2 places. And so we
It
could.
used to be worse, trust me. I went through the old one, trying to find things and it was awful.
Yeah.
I have a couple, just real quick, I think, maybe one, a couple, who knows, but I'll make it quick. On 2-1-1.3 land use matrix, add a new category for public park allowed in open space and neighborhood zone district. That's on page, I think it's the second.
Are you looking at the section comments?
I'm just looking at,
10-1-1.
I'm looking at the matrix.
At this
Okay.
guy.
Yeah, it just says that you add a new category for public park. Just curious,
Oh, I
was
see
it
it.
missing? I'm not looking at the table.
Yeah, there wasn't a category for
Oh, okay,
public park
okay.
before, so we just wanted to make it explicit.
Okay,
They are
thank you.
permitted.
All right.
I suppose I had one with, I'm not sure which one it is. It's either 10-1-1.3 land use matrix for adult daycare facilities. And I think when I looked up the definition of, there used to be like a limit as to how many people they could take, and now there's not one.
There was a limit for the square
Based off
footage.
square footage?
Yeah, we thought it was a limit based off of square footage of the site,
Yeah.
not of the building. So we were a little
Oh, okay.
interested in, most things are kind of, building based when it's something like that. And then this one was site based. So I understand the value of wanting open space, et cetera, but we thought that was an interesting standard.
Yeah, it was just kind of strange to see. Does there need to be some sort of limit per person? I mean, or not? I really don't know the answer to that question because it's an adult care facility, daycare facility is what it's defined as. I don't know if there even really needs to be a limit or if we'll just let 4,000 people show up at a 1,000 square foot house. I don't know.
Yeah, good question. We just weren't certain that was the metric that we should be.
These are in commercial zone districts, this is like in the quarter mixed or something. Cause I'm looking over at the maximum occupancy sign on the wall there, like
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the commercial
Yeah,
building
yeah.
codes, there's always an occupancy limit.
That's probably fine, yeah.
It shouldn't be a lot area requirement for the building. And that's governed by the building code.
Yeah, they're
Yeah, that
mostly
was our
allowed
rationale.
in commercial zone
Downtown,
districts,
it
they're not
looks like.
permitted in
Okay.
residential zone districts. It's listed under civic and
That may
institutional
help with
uses,
that
but it's
that
commercial.
question.
Yep.
And thank you for removing daycare, because it's children that are being cared for, not days.
Yeah.
So when I used to work with, would say that all the time, we talk about childcare facility and anyway,
Okay.
they're childcare, not day.
It was repetitive, the definitions were
Yeah,
the same,
thank you.
so.
That's the real definition. I don't wanna get into, I don't think a big discussion tonight about one topic, but I do wanna, let me find it, 1.3. Oh, here. 1-1-3.5 transition standards. Bulk lane, I saw that you obviously clarified that, but we had a lot of discussion about the beginning of that, I'm not looking at the code yet, as to, let me go back, find it.
Isn't this one adding?
10-1-3.5 transition standards.
Yeah, I think Sareed's got it.
I can't find it for some reason. Where's it? 3.5, there. We had a discussion, I brought this up, as you know, Jennifer. I'm not gonna be on this tonight, but this issue came up in a purpose about whether a transition applied to we actually had a case come in where there was a collector street or a smaller, just a minor street beside a development that was proposed, and the apartments and the garages, I think, were backing up that street, and then right across the street was a very established neighborhood of single-family homes. And I think a lot of those were ranch styles, I recall.
Correct.
And so, it would have been, in that discussion, we talked about those 4 things that the regulations are trying to address, which is reduction of the building height mass and the impact of that, and promoting privacy, and that's all under a purpose 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so it's like we're trying to make decisions that help promote privacy for neighbors, to protect their sunlight, blah blah blah. So anyway, when we had that particular land use case, I don't know if I can forget the name now because it's no, I don't know.
Yeah, it's Columbine,
still
it was
quasi
Columbine
judicial.
Square that came in.
Yes, it's Columbine Square, okay.
It has a very
So-
different design that will be coming to you,
Okay.
so it's okay if we talk
I
about
can
it.
say that, okay,
you okay with that?
so
It's
Columbine
awesome.
Square, okay, and Irving Street runs right on the west side of the development that was proposed. And in that, we had quite a discussion about that not having a common boundary line or property line. And then I kept saying, I don't agree with that because this says it's either, if you look under B applicability, it either abuts a residential neighborhood via a common lot line or is across a street from residential. It's separated by a neighborhood, blah, blah. So I kept saying I felt like number 2 applied in that particular case. But anyway, I don't know if there's anything that needs to be done to clarify some of this, but we had quite a discussion with Mike about this section, and there was some real lack of clarifications too around what is, for example, across a street. So we looked at, does that mean something that's catty corner? Is that across the street? Is this property that could be affected over here across the street? Is it only right across the street? So, it's really, there were a lot of confusing issues within this whole transition standard.
I 100% remember that conversation
Yeah, so
and
we-
Mike relaying
I
that,
think Mike's
so-
got a lot of info on it.
Yeah.
That to me is like another, we need to have a discussion about that. It'd be nice if Mike could bring in his drawings and things
Yeah,
that
he
he.
did a couple different drawings.
This change right here that, cause it didn't apply to the
It
quarter
didn't,
mix.
right, it did not
And now it
apply.
does. Now it
Right.
doesn't. So does that address it, I guess is the question.
I don't know that it does. No, I'm not sure that it does.
If it's a multifamily structure, that is not.
separated by a street.
So it might be on that applicability, I don't know if we,
So can we just, I guess my request is, can we put this on the next agenda and maybe if Mike could come to our meeting again, because we miss him so much.
He's unfortunately under the weather too.
He could bring us
Yes,
notes or
yes.
share
They've
that,
planned.
so that we could talk about that to make sure that this works.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
That's all I've got.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Anyone else?
I'll take another one.
Alright.
10.1.6 B for accessory buildings says remove plot plan requirement for accessory building permit applications. And I just wanted to know what the process was now, cause I think I looked through this and I was like, I don't know if I. So is it just a regular building permit for that, as opposed to needing this plot plan, whatever that is?
Yeah, so we've had some internal discussions in regards to what requires a survey, a plot plan. Yeah, there are a number of names that can be used.
location certificate.
Yeah, and oftentimes, we would prefer having a plot plan because then you can verify things absolutely.
So that's
Right.
been surveyed basically is what that is. Okay,
Precisely.
alright.
Yeah, precisely.
Mm-hmm.
However, it doesn't seem like there's a long history of residential locations within the city that have them readily available. That it also seems like they are not the most inexpensive of
No, they're
documents to acquire. So, this was a little bit more in line with what we've kind of been seeing coming in.
That's fair. Being that I live in a floodplain, if I wanna do anything in it, I've gotta get serious
Yeah.
surveying work done. So,
Yeah.
and it's expensive, so,
You go quite a bit further than
Yeah,
just
yep.
the survey, yeah.
Do you know what other
To build
jurisdictions
your
require?
ADU.
So,
just to build a deck,
Oh.
elevated deck to put like 3 posts down is gonna cost me a fortune, so.
No kidding.
Yeah, currently our building permit applications do not require a survey
Yeah.
for the direction of the building division.
And I think that's fair, so. Good enough.
yeah, I'm used to seeing, a city that most every place had been surveyed at one point in time. And so if the resident didn't have one, we could typically pull one from a file. Was it the most up to date? Maybe not, but at least it gave you dimensions, it gave you dimensions off the home. Here I've been a little surprised that we don't see that nearly as often.
We did receive comments related to landscaping edits that we made. So we can touch upon those briefly. So the first one would be comment number 3171. So the removal of the building permit in terms of requiring a landscape plan, the building permit review. This particular edit was made to reflect kind of current practices that we do in terms of building permits. We're not requiring landscape plans to be submitted with them, so we were trying to align current practices with the code. However, if you did want us to kind of put back that building permit requirement, we can change that language.
Oftentimes we look at when it's a single family residence, we'll look at some form of landscape documentation because they do have a requirement for a number of trees as a minimum. But for say an addition or something else, it kind of depends on what building permit. But those types of items we do not require a landscape plan for. And that's one of the reasons why looking at that change.
Yeah, I guess the concern there was under protection, you know, if we're trying to preserve trees, mature trees. If there's no permit requirement or you wouldn't even know there's a tree there and take it out, build their addition. Yeah, it's another step that somebody has to go through, but.
Yeah, oftentimes on site plans, if you submit a plan for a building permit, we don't see just general landscaping, we don't see like trees on there in the first place. Sometimes it's difficult to get site plans for people in general for building permits, so we're trying to align a little with current practices with the code changes and also what makes it a little more user friendly for the everyday citizen.
Yeah, and these comments were mine. I work with the city forester in Denver, and they're very strict in enforcing city preservation. And I know we have a relatively new city forester here, so I think my advice there was to check with the forester and suggest in terms of review.
Yeah, happy.
Again, in the interest of protecting mature trees.
Yeah, happy to do so. We certainly check in with the forester. I met the new forester, so really nice.
It was better when I picked up a new tree at the tree sale a couple weeks ago.
Excellent.
So in line with that, the next comment is related to the size of the tree protection zone, I think referenced in this image shown on the screen, where it shows 18 inches per 1 inch and the recommended change is 12 inches per inch, so we'll check in with our.
And I mentioned that because the city of Denver, again, we just changed ours because the actual national standard is 12 inches, not 18 inches.
Yeah, we'll check with the city forester and the
We
public
might
works
have-
department.
Might have went a little strong on the original.
That this is actually favorable to development to reduce it.
What is DBH? 1 inch DBH.
Diameter breast height, so if you're standing in the tree.
Could not have guessed that.
Not in the definition.
No.
Doesn't that change on how tall the person is? We need to get Jokic out here and
Exactly.
spin her up there.
So the next comment is related to this requirement of minimum 1/3 of the plant material on any lot should be evergreen. So this isn't actually a new comment. A lot of our landscaping standards are a little redundant in terms of they're repetitive in different areas. So we actually, for this comes from a section that was being
This was
repetitive under D, where we struck this landscape design section because it didn't fit under this section and it was being spoke about in other sections for landscaping. But we kept this in general, 1 minimum 1/3 should be evergreen. So it's not like something new that we added to the code, we just moved it around. But we did see the comment about kind of removing that requirement and welcome to just striking this language in general if planning commission wishes that to be gone.
Do we know if the original intent was to promote visual interest in the winter time or something like that?
Water use, maybe.
Might be diversity also. Plant diversity provides some visual interest, et cetera.
Plant diversity is a big one
Yeah,
right
Maybe
now.
rephrase it along the lines of a mix of deciduous evergreen.
I think so. I think in the interest of providing flexibility and, you know, allowing for zero escape and, you know, other types of things, we should promote a minimum. And I explained in there that I've seen it abused. People just don't understand sometimes you can't plant these big evergreen trees right next to the foundation of a house.
You can, 30 years down the road or 50
Right.
years.
They're all over.
You're gonna be
Right.
replacing your sewer line.
You don't realize how big they get.
Yeah.
Didn't a couple of Littleton buildings just had to have foundation work done because of that, didn't they? Like, weren't there trees that were 30 years old and the roots got into the foundation? I'm trying to remember.
As we've been scoping all of the sewer pipes and getting that data, we are finding a lot of roots.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember
Clay
reading or
lines, I
hearing
take it
something
too.
about it.
That I do not know.
Cause when I bought our house, one of the things that back when we did appraisals before you bought houses, and people would actually come out and do some inspections, we ran a camera through our sewer line, and there were just roots.
Yeah.
Cause they were all clay lines.
Yeah.
Back in the '60s, so they got a new sewer line out of it, which was nice, cause they did a PVC pipe, so,
Yeah.
which is way,
I think every house in our neighborhood now has had to
Yep.
have that replaced or fixed.
Yep.
But they're all clay and that's in the eighties, it's an eighties neighborhood.
jeez.
Okay, so
So
we'll just
terrible.
strike this minimum
Well,
one
actually, I
third
think-
requirement, since the line before it kind of specified,
Yeah, I think, just a quick sidebar, Commissioner Coronado and I had maybe, revise it to say something along encouraging diversity and a mix of plant,
Deciduous and evergreen,
Yeah.
landscape and.
yeah.
Or variety.
Yeah.
I guess I think someone mentioned, promoting biodiversity, disease resistance, and visual interest.
So actually the line before it speaks just to that in terms of threat of, reduce the threat and impact of plant disease, a variety of plant types. So maybe we just cut out that minimum 1/3 line and just leave it. I think the line before it addresses that and it's already in the code. The next comment after that was related to artificial turf and not permitting it in front yards. We don't specifically state as that being allowed in front yards, we just have it as, we might consider it depending on director's approval. And I'm wondering if that's fine, or if there is something in particular we should write about front yards in here.
Yeah, I know this is an issue in a lot of other places, especially like HOAs. So, it's sort of a personal preference I have. Everybody, it's appropriate to reduce water use in some uses, and certainly in backyards and side yards. I think, to me, it's right in certain areas, but I'd be open to other opinions on that. I mean, it is very controversial. Like I said, I lived in Phoenix for 30 years. It was very, they were incentivizing people to put artificial turf in the front yard. Some people hated it, some people wanted it.
Well, it's getting better all the time. I don't know if
It
you
is-
know,
it is,
I mean,
yes.
it really is. So I agree with you, but he put something like that, a restriction, I don't know, maybe it might be obsolete simply because one of these days, it's so good that,
Changes all the time.
right,
Well, it's
But,
good in
yeah.
terms of the way it looks. The unintended consequences that introduced the urban heat island.
It is.
True. Very hot.
warm.
Yeah.
I mean, measured probably 10 degrees or more. than
Yeah, you're right.
Turf grass. So the trade-off is, more water use versus more heat.
Yeah.
It's not a great
True.
choice.
I would weigh in here that I just think with the land use code that we should just stay out of getting into the weeds of unintended. of this
Getting
kind
into
of
the
stuff.
grass.
It's overly special, telling what people can do with their front yard.
Yeah,
Maybe
I
somebody wants a
agree.
big
They could
Trex
do
deck
all
that's
rock,
dark gray. If that's a huge heat thing, we have nothing to say, and it's like they can put that out there, like, this is the kind of detail that I think planning codes, we should focus on the things that really matter in shaping the community and be less about what paint colors you use, AstroTurf versus Trex versus wood, or all this stuff. It just, I would say, take it out. That's my is to not have so much stuff like this. And we're not an HOA. This is the kind of thing an HOA may weigh in on, but I don't like to see things like this in land use codes. It's just overly involved.
Our landscape design standards are very detailed.
We have a certain
Yeah,
amount of it.
design
We have
guidelines
a lot of
would
it
be-
already, but
Right.
this is, I just would say less is more in my opinion.
Yeah, it was just in there, so I wouldn't mind just striking it altogether.
I don't
Just-
think we want to do it. I agree with Dave that in 10, 15 years, this whole equation may be completely different than it is today.
I think it will be.
We may be discussing codes like Aurora's, which prohibit any turf in the front yard.
Steve Rard said he wants xeriscaping and no lawns, no grass allowed. Water conservation.
And then in terms of other kind of comments that we received so far that are just related to other code sections, we had a general comment related to our development review table and requiring pretty much neighborhood meetings for any code, zoning amendments, site development and use permits, and comprehensive rezonings. I should note that we do already require neighborhood meetings for most of those things, except for zoning and code amendments, because we can't really do neighborhood meetings for that. We have to send notification to the entire city. So that's why we don't have neighborhood meetings for that. But basically everything else listed there, we already require neighborhood meetings for that. So just in light of that comment, and then there were some comments related to parking and loading. Specifically,
Yeah, the cottage court.
in the minimum spaces required for a hotel and other overnight accommodations, the person felt that we should have whole numbers and have a minimum required space of 1 for a hotel or other overnight accommodations. Our current table states it as 0.8 per room plus the size of the meeting space or restaurant space. And for a hotel and other overnight accommodations require 0.75 per room and then meeting restaurant space. So up to planning commission's discretion if you wanna have that rounded up or leave that as is. Similar kind of remark in terms of cottage court and tiny home communities and independent living, just requiring 1 space as the minimum as opposed to not a whole number.
Fractional numbers make a lot of sense when you're talking about large facilities like hotels. And in general, parking minimums to me are pseudoscience. These tables have been invented since the 60s and don't have a great deal of correlation. In something like a hotel or overnight accommodations, I would trust the person building it. They're going to put in parking as needed for their facility, and in general, I think we're going to see parking minimums struck here, elsewhere, across the country. They're going down left, right, and center. I don't think round numbers mean anything here, and I have no problem with what's in this code. My druthers would be to get rid of it entirely, as have no minimums there. Hotels will appropriately cite parking as the kind of hotel they are and their proximity to transit and what other needs. But this seems reasonable. I don't think there's nothing wrong with a fractional number. There's no hotel with 1 room, so there will never be a 0.8 parking space need. But I don't think any of us know the difference between a Hilton's parking requirements and a Motel 6. I mean, this can't apply realistically to anything. It's just a made-up number. I'm hoping to see these go. They're going to be removed by the state probably before we get to fixing it. But I would just say that comment is not particularly germane to any change.
And I will state for anything that kind of results in us doing the multiplication and ending up with a decimal number,
round up.
we do round up to get a whole number for the record.
You mean you don't hold it to the fraction? Come on.
Yeah.
We're on our site plan doing the scale thing.
Right. I second.
We've have had duplexes and some townhomes come in with 1.5 per unit.
Really?
And they use it for storage.
And then just to kind of end the evening with our last comment of the night, all ADUs should be banned from all currently designated residential zoning. Overpopulation of the areas will strain sewer, water, power, roads, and parking. This is not the way to increase density. So I know we had a lengthy ADU discussion and
Yeah, we alluded to that
yeah.
comment. And then Zareen, could we talk about first I guess we'd open it up to any other questions. And then lastly, we just want to talk timeline a little bit for the process as well. Any questions?
Let's see, additional questions.
Okay.
Timeline.
And I apologize, Zareen, I think you've got it on the back. Thank you.
I can, do you want me to?
Either way.
Okay, cool. So yeah, since we last met, we took some of the comments you all had made to kind of our original timeline, incorporating it into a proposed timeline. We say proposed because it's still a little in flux and we're trying to work out some details, but definitely incorporated a lot of the comments that we heard from you. So we started off with that April meeting. We opened up that first public comment period. We're currently in it right now. We're having that meeting with you right now on the 22nd. We're in the process of creating sort of static poster boards that we're hoping to put in the library or museum as maybe a QR code so people can understand as a primer what type of changes we're making to the code. You know, they might see, oh, we're making changes to the ADU section, and they're like, whoa, ADU, what are you doing there? And as we discussed, we're kind of only making very minor changes. So a little bit of education going forward with that. And then we're closing up that first comment period on June 5th. And we're going to take these conversations that we had with you all, take some of these directions, take these online comments that we're getting, and work that into a second draft of the code amendment changes, and then have that go live ideally on June 21st to coincide with our first meet, greet, and eat event happening right here in Geneva Park, and use that as a public outreach opportunity, have people talk to us and have that explaining what's going on with these code amendment changes, and then hoping to do another maybe weekend event in July to get that public outreach happening again during that second comment period. We're hoping to have a public open house during that July 10th Planning Commission study session prior to that study session, so maybe like a 5 o'clock to 6:30 open house or a 5:30 to 6:30 open house. And I think we're hoping you all participate and helping residents understand some of the code changes and what's going on. So being an active participant in that process. And then we'll at 6:30 open it up to discussion for the next sort of what changes we've made since this meeting to that second comment period. Closing it up a week later on the 17th, and then on the 25th, we're hoping to have a joint Planning Commission and City Council study session. Hopefully we'll get some direction from City Council at tomorrow night's meeting, but hopefully on July 25th, that might be a chance for you all to have a discussion with City Council, maybe directly on what are you hoping to see as some of these changes.
And just a note on that, so you all most likely will have a Monday, July 24th meeting that most likely will involve a public hearing.
Most likely. We're still finalizing schedule, but
And then this study session would be on Tuesday. So can I, yep, welcome to our no, just kidding. So I guess I just wanna know, does that work for people's schedules?
Suppose it depends on the public hearing on Monday. The scale of that public hearing. If it's, say, Littleton Village that night,
That's what it might be.
you might have a few people absent on Tuesday, or not as sleepy anyway.
We stand forewarned.
So,
Sorry, what?
I said we stand forewarned,
we'll
but it's fine with my schedule.
Yeah, it's okay with me.
Certainly do my best. Seems okay.
like I said, hasn't been 100% scheduled yet.
Things have a way of
but-
sliding around on these.
And that one in particular has been sliding all over the place, so it could be that we can work with them and see that we work with their schedule to move it to August. So,
we'll just have to brew some coffee.
Lots of coffee.
and in which case we would cancel the July 24th then, so
So we don't have the 25th.
If we're able to.
if we're able
move
to
The other end on.
to move it. Okay,
Yeah.
wanted to point that out, thank you, continue.
Speaking of August, that's when we're hoping to get that actual ordinance in front of you. That will be a public hearing, so instead of these from all these study sessions, it'll lead up to that public hearing and we'll have public comments then and hopefully get things ironed out. If there's any, we're hoping we don't have any more edits, but there might be, depending on public comments, and that will tee us all up for first reading with council in September, and then the final reading and public hearing of the ordinance in front of city council in the beginning of October. So hopefully timeline works for you all, and it'll be a busy next 4 or 5 months-ish, so be prepared for a lot of meetings. But yeah, thank you for all your suggestions in terms of trying to get more public outreach and public comments for this round, and we definitely took that to heart, and hopefully you guys see that.
Thank you for all
Yeah.
your work. Does anybody care about the Nuggets?
They won't, they
Won. I know, I just laughed.
They're in the finals?
Yeah, nice win.
Oh.
I had a peek.
No, I mean, I didn't know if there was one
Oh,
more
no.
game.
Conference
to
finals,
end
if
this
they
year.
win
Yeah, we-
one more,
Super Bowl.
then they go to the finals.
Yeah.
Swell.
I think
Sweet.
Commissioner Reynolds, that might be a cue for you to end the meeting, or?
Alright.
Yeah. Just maybe.
Yeah, I don't know if we're still being recorded.
Yeah.
Thank you.